ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 1 of the series, so be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. A 16-year-old teenager stood in the dimly lit room, his eyes following the complex patterns of the talismans on the shelves. Each symbol felt both familiar and disconcerting, tugging at his consciousness. The air was laden with the aroma of incense and aged parchment, fostering an environment rich in mysticism. He ran a hand through his dark, messy hair, a few strands of green catching the faint light. His teal eyes, once bright with hope, now held a weariness that spoke of years of hardship and loss. The weight of his past pressed down on him, threatening to crush his very soul. "Cursed," Izuku muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The word echoed in his mind, a cruel reminder of the twists of fate that had befallen him. Cursed to be loved, cursed to amount to nothing, cursed to never find someone who truly cares. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides. And the curse of all, to be powerless, unable to change my destiny or protect those I hold dear. As he examined the talismans, realizing they were designed to contain his overprotective feelings for his friend within his soul, Izuku turned to sit back down. The sudden creak of an opening door halted his movement, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. A figure stepped into the room, his presence immediately commanding attention. Clad in a black jumpsuit that accentuated his athletic build, the newcomer moved with a fluid grace that spoke of years of training. Bandages covered his face, obscuring his eyes, but his snow-white hair stood in stark contrast to the dimness of the room. Despite his concealed gaze, the stranger exuded an aura of power and wisdom that sent a shiver down Izuku's spine. Each step was purposeful and deliberate, the soft rustle of his clothing mingling with the echo of his footsteps. As the man approached, Izuku felt an inexplicable pull, as if drawn by the stranger's sheer charisma. He came to a stop before Izuku, his posture controlled, yet somehow inviting. "Izuku Yagi," the man spoke, his voice a blend of authority and gentleness that caught Izuku off guard. "We must talk." Izuku raised his weary eyes, dark circles beneath them a testament to his exhaustion. His gaze met the stranger's obscured face, a mix of apprehension and curiosity swirling within him. He unconsciously touched the necklace around his neck, the last memento of his departed friend, drawing strength from its familiar presence. Taking a deep breath, Izuku steadied himself. He thought about the name he had chosen for himself, a small act of rebellion against the life that had been forced upon him. "My name is Izuku Okatsu now," he thought, the words a silent affirmation of his new identity. Formerly Izuku Yagi. He paused, gathering his thoughts before speaking. The weight of his experiences and the strange circumstances that had led him to this place all swirled in his mind. With a mixture of resignation and determination, he met the stranger's gaze once more. "And this," Izuku thought, his voice quiet but steady, "this is my cursed story. 12 years ago, age 4, Mizudafa Hospital, Japan. Oka-chan, don't you think I might have a cool quirk?" Izuku asked, his round face beaming with excitement. His fluffy, pure black hair streaked with vivid green danced around his head in wild, unrestrained waves. "Yeah, Oka-chan, I hope I get an awesome quirk too." Izumi chimed in, her long, curly green locks bouncing as she shifted in her seat. The twins shared striking emerald eyes, their cheeks adorned with 3 freckles arranged like a delicate constellation. Their mother, Inko Yagi, smiled warmly at her children's enthusiasm. She was a slender woman with a gentle demeanor that instantly put others at ease. Her big, expressive eyes were a few shades deeper than her children's, reminiscent of lush forest foliage. Her straight, sleek hair cascaded past her shoulders in a shiny curtain of deep green, save for a small, spiky ponytail that bounced playfully at the base of her neck. "I'm sure you both will develop amazing quirks," she reassured them, gently stroking Izuku's unruly hair. The family sat in the waiting room at Mizudafa Hospital, the air thick with anticipation as they awaited the doctor's return with the results of the twins' quirk assessment. Izuku, slightly shorter than his sister, fidgeted restlessly, his mind racing with possibilities about the incredible power that might suddenly manifest within him. Izumi leaned forward, her forest green gaze sparkling with determination. "I can't wait to find out," she whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained excitement. The twins exchanged knowing looks, their young minds painting vivid pictures of the great deeds and incredible talents that surely awaited them. In their burgeoning, curious imaginations, the world remained an open canvas to be colored by their individuality. The door creaked open, and the twins' heads swiveled towards it with sudden interest. Their eyes grew wide as the doctor himself entered. He was an elderly man with a kindly demeanor, his soft, wrinkled features radiating warmth. Despite the gentle sag of advanced age, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. His balding head gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a meticulously trimmed mustache twitching as he smiled. The white lab coat he wore bore faded stains, a testament to years of dedicated service. Peculiar goggles in the form of gears hung from his neck, hinting at an inventive mind and a keen eye for detail. His name tag, swaying gently with each measured step, read Dr. Tsubasa. As he approached the family, his presence exuded calm authority. The corners of his eyes crinkled as he offered a warm smile, instantly putting the anxious twins at ease. "Well, Mrs. Yagi, I have some news regarding the assessment of the children's quirks," Tsubasa began, his voice soft and low, tinged with a hint of solemnity. He paused, carefully weighing his words as he addressed the family waiting anxiously for his response. Inko's heart began to race as she instinctively reached out to squeeze her children's hands reassuringly. Izuku and Izumi both leaned forward, their emerald eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Tsubasa's sharp gaze softened as he met the twins' hopeful expressions. "The good news is that your daughter, Izumi, has manifested an extraordinary quirk." A warm smile spread across his wrinkled features as he turned to address the young girl. "Izumi, my dear, you possess the unique ability to attract objects with your mind." Izumi's eyes widened, her mouth forming a tiny O of surprise and delight. "Really?" she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper as she processed the incredible news. Tsubasa nodded encouragingly. "Yes, indeed. With proper training and dedication, you could become a great hero." A beaming smile spread across Izumi's face, her freckles dancing animatedly with unrestrained happiness. Inko gazed at her daughter with pride, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. However, the doctor's expression turned grave as he shifted his focus to Izuku, whose light-colored eyes still glowed with anticipation. Tsubasa felt a heaviness in his heart, knowing the difficult truth he had to impart. Quirkless, that single word hung in the air, a smothering weight that crushed Izuku's cherished dreams beneath its oppressive force. The emerald eyes that once burned bright with hope and wonder dimmed as the doctor's grim pronouncement sank in. Izuku's mind whirled, desperately grasping at every possibility that this was all just a terrible mistake. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The silence that followed the doctor's devastating words was deafening. Beside him, Izumi's bright smile wavered, her brow furrowing in confusion as she struggled to understand the implications of her brother's lack of a quirk. Inko's hand shot to her mouth, stifling a gasp as her heart ached for her son. Dr. Tsubasa's face was a picture of compassion, his eyes sparkling with sincere sadness for the little boy whose dreams he had just shattered. "Izuku," he began, his voice gentle but heavy with solemnity, "I know this is hard to hear, but being quirkless doesn't mean your life is over. There are still many paths you can follow, many ways you can contribute to society." Inside Izuku's mind, a tornado of hopes and dreams lay in pieces. He had dreamed of being like the great heroes, using extraordinary powers for justice and protection. Now, that possibility seemed to slip through his fingers like sand, leaving him adrift in a sea of uncertainty. He felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes, but stubbornly refused to let them fall. Gritting his teeth, he struggled to keep his expression neutral. But I wanted to be a hero, he finally managed, his voice quavering with the weight of his broken dreams. Feeling his heartache for the young boy, Tsubasa gently patted Izuku's shoulder. I know, my boy. You're young, and there's so much more to life than just being a hero. There are many careers out there where you can make a difference. Thank you, Doctor, Inko said, her eyes clouded with a mix of sorrow and resignation. Her smile was small and tight-lipped, never quite reaching her eyes, betraying the turmoil within. Izuku's shoulders sagged, his gaze fixed on the floor as a single tear traced its way down his freckled cheek. His dreams of soaring through the skies and saving lives with incredible powers crumbled around him like shattered glass. Izumi looked from her brother to her mother, her brows knitted in confusion. But Oka-chan, what about Izuku? Doesn't he get a quirk too? She asked, her voice laced with concern. Inko's heart clenched at the raw disappointment etched across her son's face. She reached out, gently ruffling his green locks in a comforting gesture. Sweetheart, sometimes, not everyone gets a quirk, but that doesn't make you any less special or capable of achieving great things. Izuku's fists clenched at his sides, his nails digging into his palms as he fought to hold back the tears threatening to spill over. But I wanted to be a hero, just like All Might, he whispered again, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. Inko pulled Izuku into a warm embrace, her own heart breaking for her son whose dreams had been shattered. I know, little hero, she murmured, pressing a tender kiss to the top of his head. But there are so many ways to be a hero, quirk or not. You have a kind heart and a brave spirit, and that's the most important thing a true hero can have. Thank you, Oka-chan, Izuku whispered, his voice cracking as hot tears finally streamed down his freckled cheeks. Inko stood, gathering her children close, and turned to face the doctor with a resolute nod. Kids, let's go home. When they arrived home, Inko sat the twins down to explain what the hospital had revealed to their father, Toshinori. He was a tall, thin man with one of the kindest faces imaginable, his eyes crinkling at the edges when he smiled. He listened intently as Inko recounted the doctor's assessment. Toshinori beamed with pride as he learned about Izumi's telekinetic capabilities. He playfully ruffled the young girl's curly green locks. That's my girl. With a quirk like that and the right training, you'll be an incredible hero one day. Izumi glowed under her father's praise, but when Toshinori's gaze fell on Izuku, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Izuku could sense the feigned cheer behind it, the undercurrent of pity that made his heart sink even further. Although I was quite perceptive at the time, being quirkless hit me full force in our society. I remember at preschool how the other children would mob Izumi when her abilities first manifested. Their eyes shone with wonder and admiration like she was some kind of living miracle. But then things very quickly changed the instant word spread that I was quirkless. Suddenly, I was the outcast, the target of all their ridicule and cruel whispers. I pushed on with the help of my parents and their friends at work, especially from my mother's unconditional love and encouragement. But this slowly started to change over the months. That extraordinary talent that Izumi had for her quirk gradually enthralled even my parents, and their focus started shifting away from me to cultivate her excellent nascent abilities. At first, it was small things, extra training sessions and special outings designed to hone her skills. Gradually, though, it began to manifest in stronger ways. Dinners at the table revolved around Izumi's progress, potential, and the bright future lying ahead of her as a hero in training. I'd sit there, pushing food around my plate, feeling more and more invisible with each passing day. I was trying not to let it get to me, but it was getting pretty impossible not to feel the isolation. Mom and Dad's faces would light up whenever Izumi did anything telekinetic. By the time their eyes shifted over to me, they were still just sort of dim, like someone had turned down the brightness of their expressions. My mom, my old champion, seemed to have less and less time for me. Her attention now belonged to Izumi's training regime, researching the best methods to nurture the inevitable choosing of some prestigious hero academy. I'd sometimes catch her looking at me with a mix of pity and disappointment, quickly masked when she realized I'd noticed. It wasn't intentional negligence, but rather a byproduct of their overwhelming pride and ambition for Izumi's success. She, in their eyes, was ordained for greatness, a hero in the making whose legend would be among the stars. I was just out there, a reminder of what could have been perhaps. I became the afterthought, a shadow in the background, fading into obscurity as the spotlight shone brightly on my sister's extraordinary abilities. The once warm hugs became perfunctory, the proud smiles reserved for Izumi's achievements. I was drowning in a sea of indifference, and no one seemed to notice. My days turned into a blur of waking up early, getting ready for school, and suffering through the isolation that came with being quirkless. Izumi had blossomed in her abilities and classmates' regard. In turn, I was met with at best indifference, and at worst, downright distaste. The whispers in the hallways, the pointing fingers, the mocking laughter, they all became a constant backdrop to my school life. Some days were worse than others. On really bad days, Izumi's friends would crowd around her in a circle as she summoned her telekinesis powers to float some object, which would ostensibly levitate with just the flick of her wrist. And most days, well, that I'll show you. Izuku lay crumpled on the grass, a sprawl of bruises and cuts all over his body. Vital fluid oozed from his nose and the corner of his mouth, dropping onto the blades of grass beneath him, painting them crimson. His former friend, Katsuki, now one of the brainwashed followers of Izumi, sneered down at his battered form, his explosive quirk crackling menacingly at his fingertips. "Deku, you useless," Katsuki spat, his crimson eyes burning with contempt. "You really think that a quirkless weakling like you can become a hero?" He let out a derisive laugh, and his cronies joined in with cruel guffaws that echoed across the schoolyard. Izuku winced, every bark of laughter a stiletto to the heart. He struggled to push himself up, his arms trembling with the effort, but Katsuki planted a foot on his back, holding him to the ground. The pressure sent a jolt of pain through Izuku's already battered body. "Stay down, Deku," Katsuki growled, his voice laced with poison. "You are nothing but a small rock in the pathway to greatness. People of our kind, gifted with wonderful quirks, will be the heroes. You're right there, well, you're just a worthless speck clinging on to a dream that will never come true." Behind Katsuki stood his twin sister Katsumi, a spitting image of their mother, Mitsuki Bakugo. Her hands were on her hips, a smirk playing on her lips as she watched the scene unfold. Next to Izumi were the Todoroki twins, Shoto and Shoka, their heterochromatic eyes cold and indifferent to Izuku's plight. Tears pricked at Izuku's eyes as his vision began to blur, fighting against the weight Katsuki was applying with his foot. The grass tickled his cheek, a cruel contrast to the pain coursing through his body. I won't give up," he rasped, his voice hoarse from all the beatings. "I'll become a hero, no matter what it takes." Katsuki sneered, his expression twisting into a sadistic grin. "Oh yeah? And how do you plan on doing that? Huh? You are about as useful as a pile of trash." He leaned down, his hot breath fanning across Izuku's face, smelling of nitroglycerin from his quirk. "Face it, Deku. You're nothing, and you'll never amount to anything." With a vicious push, Katsuki ground Izuku's face into the dirt, eliciting a muffled cry of pain from the green-haired boy. Katsuki then stepped back, laughing away with the rest of his former friends. The sound echoed in Izuku's ears, a haunting melody of cruelty and rejection. As the group walked away, their laughter fading into the distance, Izuku remained on the ground, his body aching, his spirit crushed. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of determination refused to be extinguished. It was small, barely a flicker, but it was there a stubborn resolve to become a hero, no matter the cost. "Why me? Why does it have to happen to me?" Izuku whispered, his voice shaking with anguish as he collapsed onto the grass. Tears streamed down his freckled cheeks, mixing with the vital fluid from his nose and the split in his lip as it dripped, creating red trails on his skin. He tried to push himself up, but a sharp pain lanced through his ribs, forcing a grimace to twist his features. His arms shook with the effort as his body, battered and bruised from relentless beatings, threatened to collapse again. The world around him seemed to spin, a kaleidoscope of green grass and blue sky, mocking him with its beauty in the face of his pain. In that moment, Izuku felt so alone, a speck of insignificance in a world that celebrated powers and scorned those without. His dream to fly high across the skies and save lives with powers beyond imagination seemed to crash down on him like shattered glass, each shard a reminder of his perceived worthlessness. "Will anyone in this world ever accept me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, a begging appeal to the universe that had forsaken him. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying his words away, seemingly indifferent to his plea. It was as if his prayer had been answered when a soft rustle of fabric came through to him. Izuku lifted his gaze, his eyes widening as a slender figure materialized before him. There, standing before him, was a girl with cascading raven tresses all down her back. Soft eyes held concern and curiosity, resting on his features. Her peach-colored skin was smooth, except for a beauty mark just below her chin, like a small defect that only set off her wraith-like beauty. She was clad in a black, sleeveless dress with a white collar and small heart patterns, skinny, clinging onto her willowy frame. Her feet were shod in purple shoes, visible under the skirt of her dress, finishing off a whimsical, yet endearing appearance. Izuku blinked, unsure if this vision standing before him was real, or only the jolt of his battered imagination. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat like a tangled mess of emotions that refused to untangle. The girl slanted her head to the side, and her eyes sparkled with an unearthly quality as she gazed upon the broken boy lying before her. Her smile was soft at the corners, a silent promise of comfort and understanding in a world that had rejected him. Of hope came through Izuku's heart, a flame that would not quench, no matter the adversity wind. It was small, barely more than an ember, but it was there a warmth he hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. She spoke with a soft and sweet voice, like a gentle breeze on a summer day. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" she asked, her eyes never leaving Izuku's beaten form. "No, I'm fine," Izuku replied, wincing as he tried to sit up. The girl's presence had startled him, but there was a gentleness in her demeanor that put him at ease. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of comfort in her presence, as if she understood his pain without him having to explain. She tilted her head, her brown tresses cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of chocolate. "Are you sure? You look pretty beaten up." Her voice was laced with genuine concern, something Izuku hadn't heard directed at him in a long time. Izuku's gaze fell, shame burning his cheeks. "It's nothing I can't handle," he mumbled, trying to sound stronger than he felt. But even as he said it, he could feel his resolve crumbling under her kind gaze. The girl's eyes softened with understanding. "Those boys were bullying you, weren't they?" When Izuku didn't respond, she sighed, a sound filled with empathy rather than pity. "I'm Rika. Oramoto Rika. Izuku Yagi," he mumbled, finally meeting her gentle gaze. Her eyes were a light brown and looked at him with curiosity and kindness. Rika's lips curved into a warm smile that seemed to light up the entire schoolyard. "It's nice to meet you, Izuku." She glanced around the space, then back at him. "Why don't you tell me what's going on? I'm a good listener." Izuku hesitated, unsure if he could trust this stranger. But as he studied her open expression, he felt a strange sense of kinship, as if she could understand his pain in a way others couldn't. It was like finding an oasis in the desert of his loneliness. "It's because I'm quirkless," he admitted the words, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. "The other kids think I'm worthless because of it." He waited for the usual look of pity or disgust, but it never came. Rika's brows knitted together, her expression one of genuine concern rather than judgment. "That's terrible," she murmured. "Just because you don't have a quirk doesn't mean you're worthless. There's so much more to a person than their abilities." Warmth bloomed in Izuku's chest at her words, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was like a ray of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You think so?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, afraid to hope. Of course. Rika's gaze sharpened with determination, a fire blazing in her brown eyes. Izuku, do you want to be my friend? She asked softly, extending a delicate hand to help him up. Izuku's eyes widened at the sudden offer, flicking from her offered hand to her soft smile, searching for any sign of trickery or mocking. Seeing neither, he placed his palm gingerly in hers, marveling at how warm and real it felt. She lifted him to his feet with little apparent effort, steadying him when he swayed slightly. As he stood, Izuku winced, and the throbbing aches and pains of the earlier beating made themselves known once more. Rika's brow furrowed at his discomfort, her hand still holding his gently. Swallowing past the lump in his throat, Izuku met her gaze once more. I'd like that, he said quietly. To be your friend, I mean. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but they brought with them a surge of hope he hadn't felt in years. The instant he said it, Rika's face lit up like the rising sun at dawn, her radiant smile seeming to dispel all lingering shadows of his torment. Great, she exclaimed, her enthusiasm infectious. We can start by patching you up. I know a quiet spot where we can rest for a bit. She took his arm, careful of his wounds, and turned across the schoolyard with him toward a more secluded corner beneath the drooping branches of a weeping willow. As they walked, Izuku studied her beside him, this strange, ethereal girl who had appeared from nowhere yet spoke with such compassion. She seemed to glow with an inner light, a beacon in the darkness that had become his life. A weird warmth crept up in his chest, and the tendrils curled around his bruised heart. Maybe, just maybe, he had finally found his way out of the dark, haunting loneliness that had taken over his life. With each step they took together, Izuku felt a little lighter, a little stronger. For the first time in what seemed to be forever, Izuku allowed himself to rekindle the most remote ember of hope within himself. With Rika by his side, he felt possibilities begin to unfurl, like the petals of a flower opening to the sun. As they settled beneath the willow tree, its leaves creating a curtain of privacy around them, Izuku realized that perhaps his story wasn't over yet. Perhaps it was just beginning. For years later, age 10, July 15th. The years seemed to flash by, a blend of sweetness and bitter loneliness. As Azumi continued to rise, basking in the adoration of our parents and peers, I found solace in Rika's steadfast companionship. She became my beacon in the darkness, a constant reminder that I wasn't alone in this world that seemed to have turned its back on me. Birthdays, once celebrated with joy, slowly faded into afterthoughts as our parents focused on nurturing Izumi's special talent. The sting of neglect threatened to overwhelm me, but Rika's unwavering friendship kept me afloat, lightening the path ahead. On this particular day, we found ourselves in the same park where we first met. The air was thick with nostalgia and the warmth of cherished memories. We sat beneath the weeping willow, its drooping branches swaying gently in the summer breeze, creating a curtain of privacy around us. Rika's brown eyes sparkled as she reached into her pocket, pulling out a small, velvet box. "Happy birthday, Izuku," she whispered, her voice as soft as the rustling leaves above us. She opened the box, revealing a simple silver necklace with a ring pendant. My breath caught in my throat as she carefully clasped it around my neck. The metal felt cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the warmth blooming in my chest. "This is a symbol of our friendship," Rika explained, her eyes shining with an emotion that seemed beyond her years. "It's a promise that I'll always be by your side, no matter what. And someday," she paused, a slight blush coloring her cheeks, "it'll be for our marriage." I touched the ring gently, marveling at its simplicity and the depth of meaning behind it. "Rika, this means more to me than you could ever know." At that moment, I realized the magnitude of her gesture. It was a childlike promise, yes, but also an oath of perpetuity against the odds. We were kindred spirits, our bond forged in the fires of loneliness but tempered by the strength of our hearts. As the afternoon wore on, we shared stories and laughter, the weight of my usual worries lifting in Rika's presence. For those precious hours, I felt truly seen and understood. But our blissful day was about to shatter. As we left the park, hand in hand, the world seemed brighter. We crossed the quiet street, lost in conversation and the joy of each other's company. Neither of us noticed the danger until it was almost too late. The screech of tires pierced the air. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat at the sight of a sleek black sedan barreling towards us. The driver's eyes were unfocused, his hands slack on the wheel. Time seemed to slow. Rika's hand slipped from mine, her eyes wide with fear and determination. Before I could react, she was moving, not away from the danger, but towards it. A small boy stood frozen in the street, paralyzed by fear. Rika threw herself towards him, her body connecting with the car in a sickening thud. She tumbled across the asphalt like a rag doll, her raven hair fanning out around her. "Rika!" My scream tore from my throat, raw and primal. I ran to her, falling to my knees beside her crumpled form. The acrid smell of burnt rubber and gasoline filled the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood. I cradled her in my arms, her warmth already fading. Her emerald eyes flickered open, locking onto mine with an intensity that pierced my soul. "Izuku," she whispered, vital fluid trickling from the corner of her mouth. Her trembling fingers clutched at the ring necklace, smearing it with crimson. "And never forget our promise." Tears streamed down my face as I held her closer. "Please, don't leave me," I begged, my voice cracking. "I can't lose you too. You're all I have." Rika's lips curved into a faint smile, her radiance dimming with each passing second. "You'll never be alone," she breathed. Her gaze drifted, becoming unfocused as the last vestiges of life slipped away. I howled in anguish, my cries echoing through the empty streets. The one light in my world, my tether to hope, had been cruelly extinguished. In that moment, I felt the last fragments of my battered soul shatter, leaving me adrift in a sea of darkness and despair. As I knelt there, lost in my grief, a strange sensation prickled at the edge of my awareness. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I looked up, my vision blurred by tears, and saw it. A sludge-like creature was crawling towards me, its form as black as the void and reeking of decay. It had no eyes, no discernible features, yet I knew with certainty that it was looking at me. This was a curse, I realized with growing horror, the first I had ever encountered. It spoke, its voice a grating, inhuman sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Izuku," it rasped, "when we grow yup, let's get married." Revulsion and terror seized me as the foul creature reached out a ropey tendril that curled around my legs with a cold, clammy embrace. My face contorted into an expression of abject horror. My whole being recoiled from this foul aberration. "It's a promise, Izuku." 6 years later. Age 16. July 15th, a week before. It's been 6 long years since Rika died and became a cursed spirit. I can still vividly remember her funeral. My face remained stoic and emotionless throughout the service, despite the tears that threatened to fall. By then, I had reached a point where I no longer cared about what was happening around me. Izumi and her friends had made it crystal clear where I stood in this unjust world of ours. Aldera Junior High. The classroom buzzed with the usual chatter of teenagers as the teacher entered, a stack of papers in his hands. He cleared his throat, silencing the room. "Hey, third years," he called out, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and nostalgia. "It's that time when you should start thinking about your future." He paced back and forth, waving the papers. "I have these career forms for all of you, but—" He paused, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "I know you all have big dreams of becoming heroes." With a theatrical flourish, he tossed the forms into the air. They fluttered down like confetti, eliciting cheers from most of the students. Yeah, the majority of the class erupted in enthusiasm, their quirks activating in small bursts of excitement. One student's hair turned into writhing snakes, another's skin glowed like a disco ball, and yet another's fingers stretched like rubber bands. However, amidst the sea of excitement, 5 individuals remained noticeably silent. Their expressions ranged from indifference to barely concealed arrogance, setting them apart from their peers. The teacher's smile faltered slightly as he noticed the divide. "Yes, you all have wonderful quirks," he continued, his tone more subdued. "But remember, it's against the rules to use them in school." Heh! A scoffing voice cut through the excitement. All heads turned to the mid-right of the classroom, where Katsuki Bakugo sat with his feet propped up on his desk. "Don't lump me and my friends together with all you extras." The 16-year-old Katsuki, his spiky blonde hair as wild as his personality, wore a smug grin. With their useless quirks, they should consider themselves lucky just to be some D-listed sidekicks. Before he could continue his rant, another student interrupted. "Quit being so full of yourself, Katsuki." Katsuki's eyes flashed with cruel amusement or arrogance, tiny sparks dancing in his palms. "Shut it. Extras should know their place." The teacher, sensing the growing tension, quickly intervened. "Ah, Bakugo," he said, his eyes scanning the room before settling on a group of students. "I heard that you, Katsumi, the Todoroki twins, and Izumi are all aiming for UA High School." The class's attention shifted to the mentioned students. Shoto and Shoka Todoroki sat side by side, their dual-colored hair a stark reminder of their powerful lineage. Shoka's hair had grown longer over the years, cascading down her back in a mesmerizing mix of red and white. Next to them, Katsumi Bakugo leaned back in her chair, a confident smirk playing on her lips. She had undergone quite a transformation since childhood. Her long blonde hair was styled, uniquely a spiky fringe framed her face, while two short pigtails at the back added a touch of playfulness to her fierce appearance. Dedicated training and her presence commanded attention. Izumi, seated nearby, gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Her emerald eyes, once filled with childlike wonder, now held a determined spark. She had grown into a formidable young woman, her physique sculpted from years of rigorous training under All Might's guidance. The room buzzed with renewed chatter after the announcement. Katsuki, never one to miss an opportunity to boast, hopped onto his desk. "That's right," he declared, his voice brimming with confidence. "We've either aced the mock exam or earned recommendations. UA is the only place deserving of elites like us. The other schools can have the leftovers." Katsumi rolled her eyes at her twin's words but didn't argue. "We've been preparing for this our entire lives," she added, her voice carrying a similar assurance, but with a hint of more composure. The Todoroki twins exchanged a glance but remained silent, their thoughts about UA concealed behind unreadable expressions. As the excitement began to die down, the teacher's eyes fell on a figure at the back of the class. "Oh, Yagi," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. "You're also going for UA, aren't you?" The classroom plunged into an eerie silence. It felt as if all the air had been sucked out, leaving a void of shock and disbelief. The background seemed to blur, leaving only the intense emotions at the center of the room. Bakugo's face contorted with a mix of shock and fury. His crimson eyes widened and then narrowed dangerously, his jaw clenched so hard it seemed on the verge of snapping. Veins bulged in his neck as he struggled to contain his explosive anger. Behind him, previously unnoticed, sat a boy who seemed to contrast the lively energy of the classroom. His jet-black hair with streaks of emerald green was a stark reminder of what used to be. Until that moment, he had been slumped over his desk, seemingly asleep or lost in his own world. Upon hearing his name, Izuku Yagi slowly raised his head. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as if each motion took immense effort. As his face came into view, the class collectively held their breath. Izuku's teal eyes, once vibrant with life and dreams, now appeared hollow and distant. Dark, permanent bags hung beneath them, a testament to sleepless nights and haunting memories. His gaze held a cold, glassy quality, as if he were looking through everyone rather than at them. For a brief moment, Izuku and Bakugo locked eyes. During that fleeting instant, a hint of something, maybe acknowledgement, maybe defiance, flashed across Izuku's expression before it returned to its usual mask of indifference. "Yes," Izuku replied, his voice flat and emotionless. "So what? The classroom erupted into laughter, the tension breaking like a dam. Comments flew from all directions, each more mocking than the last. The second-best twin? Really? You can't get a hero license with good grades alone, Yagi. What's your quirk again? Oh right, you don't have one. Amidst the cacophony of laughter and jeers, Izuku remained still, his expression unchanged. He had long since learned to tune out their words, to let them wash over him like water off a duck's back. But deep inside, in a place he rarely acknowledged, a small flame of determination continued to burn. Bakugo seethed with silent anger, his face contorted into a mask of rage. His crimson eyes, blazing with fury, locked onto Izuku's stoic form. With deliberate and menacing steps, he advanced towards Izuku's desk, each footfall echoing in the now silent classroom. The air crackled with tension as Bakugo's palm ignited with small, threatening explosions. The sharp scent of nitroglycerin hung in the air, a potent reminder of the unpredictable ability at his disposal. Suddenly, he forcefully slammed his explosive hand down on Izuku's desk, sending a tremor through the room. The sudden loud noise caused several students to flinch, but Izuku remained unfazed. His emotionless teal eyes slowly rose to meet Bakugo's intense glare. The sharp contrast between Bakugo's explosive anger and Izuku's cold indifference created an almost tangible tension in the air. "Wow, Bakugo, I'm surprised you didn't do that earlier," Izuku remarked sardonically, his voice laced with a hint of boredom. "You think you're funny, Deku?" Bakugo snarled, the low, even tone of his voice making it all the more threatening. Small explosions kept popping in the palm of his hand, scorching the surface of Izuku's desk. "You think a quirkless nobody like you has any place at UA?" Izuku's response was a deliberate blink, his face remaining impassive. At this, Bakugo seemed to grow even angrier, his face twisting further into a deep scowl. "What's wrong, Deku? Cat got your tongue?" Bakugo snarled, leaning in closer. His hot breath ghosted over Izuku's face, carrying the faint scent of caramel. "Or are you finally realizing just how pathetic your dreams are?" Izuku's expression didn't change, but something flickered in the depths of his eyes. It wasn't fear, nor was it anger. It was a more somber, deep-set mixture of resignation and barely contained resentment. "My dreams?" Izuku finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you know about my dreams, Kakin?" The childhood nickname slipped out, laced with a bitterness that even Bakugo paused at. For a moment, the classroom was silent, the tension palpable. Then Izuku continued, a hard edge to his voice. "You're right. I am quirkless. But that doesn't mean I can't try. It doesn't mean I can't fight." Bakugo's free hand clenched tightly, his knuckles white from the strain. His entire body shook and quivered with barely restrained anger, like a volcano on the verge of eruption. You dare," he growled, his voice quavering with rage. Bakugo's arms surged forward, unleashing a torrent of explosions from his palm. But before the blast could connect, Izuku's hand darted out with unexpected speed, seizing Bakugo's wrist with a strong, unwavering grip. In one fluid motion, Izuku twisted, using Bakugo's momentum against him. The blonde's eyes widened in shock as he felt his feet leave the ground. With a resounding thud, Bakugo's back slammed onto Izuku's desk, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs. Izuku maintained his hold, twisting Bakugo's arm into a painful lock. "See, Kakin?" he said, his voice low and cold. A bitter smirk played at the corners of his mouth, a far cry from the timid smiles of their childhood. "This is what I meant by fighting." Bakugo's face contorted, a mix of pain, shock, and unbridled fury. His crimson eyes burned with a rage that seemed to set the very air around them ablaze. He struggled against Izuku's grip, small explosions popping futilely from his trapped palm. You monster!" Bakugo snarled through gritted teeth, his face contorted with a mixture of pain and fury. His red eyes blazed with an intensity that could melt steel, but beneath the anger, there was a flicker of disbelief. How dare you? When did you? He stammered, struggling to comprehend how the tables had turned so dramatically. Izuku's grip remained firm, his teal eyes cold and unforgiving. I wouldn't do that if I were you, he warned, his voice low and steady. I could dislocate your arm right now. The class watched in stunned silence, the air thick with tension. The seemingly impossible had happened. The Quirkless Deku had overpowered the explosive prodigy. Even Katsumi, usually quick to jump to her twin's defense, stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. Bakugo's muscles tensed as he fought against Izuku's hold, small explosions crackling ineffectively from his trapped palm. Each pop and sizzle only seemed to emphasize his powerlessness in this situation. Let me go, Bakugo growled, each word dripping with venom. His free hand twitched, itching to unleash an explosion, but the awkward angle of his position left him at a disadvantage. Izuku leaned in closer, his breath ghosting over Bakugo's ear. Not so fun being on the other side, is it, Kakin? He whispered, the childhood nickname now a mockery of their shared past. For a moment, something flickered in Bakugo's eyes, a hint of recognition, perhaps even a touch of fear. But it was quickly consumed by the inferno of his rage. I'll kill you for this, Deku, he spat, renewing his struggles. Izuku's grip tightened fractionally, eliciting a barely suppressed wince from Bakugo. You've been trying to do that for years, Izuku replied, his voice eerily calm. How's that working out for you? The teacher, finally finding his voice, suddenly stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, shattering the tense silence that gripped the classroom. Yagi! Bakugo! That's enough! He shouted, his face reddening with a mixture of anger and embarrassment for losing control of his class. Both of you, let go of each other right now and return to your seats. Izuku maintained eye contact with Bakugo for a moment, his inscrutable teal eyes locking with Bakugo's fiery gaze. Then he slowly loosened his grip on Bakugo's arm. As Bakugo hastily got up and massaged his wrist, Izuku calmly adjusted his uniform. Sorry, Sensei, Izuku said, showing no trace of genuine remorse in his voice. It won't happen again. Bakugo, still furious, attempted to speak, but the teacher interjected sharply. No more, Bakugo. Get back to your seat. Now. As Bakugo stomped back to his desk, muttering curses under his breath, the rest of the class watched in stunned silence. The air was thick with tension, and whispers began to circulate among the students. Did you see that? How did Deku do that? Maybe he's not as useless as we thought. Izuku ignored the murmurs, his face an impassive mask as he sat back down. He could feel the weight of his classmates' stares, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and newfound respect. As the class gradually settled into the familiar routine of the day, Izuku noticed Izumi out of the corner of his eye. His sister's gaze held a mix of surprise, concern, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Their eyes briefly connected, and Izuku felt a moment of something indescribable. But he swiftly pushed it aside, refocusing his attention on the teacher's monotonous voice. Time skip. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of another grueling school day, Izuku began to pack up his belongings. The classroom buzzed with the usual chatter and movement of students eager to leave, but Izuku remained focused on his task, his movements mechanical and precise. He reached for his hero analysis journal, number 13 in a long series that documented his tireless observations of heroes and their quirks. The worn notebook was a testament to his unwavering dedication, despite the constant ridicule and discouragement he faced. Its cover was adorned with carefully drawn hero emblems, each one a reminder of the dream he refused to let go. Just as his fingers grazed the cover, a hand swooped in and snatched the journal away. Izuku's eyes followed the movement, his expression unchanging despite the familiar pang of frustration that coursed through him. Well, what do we have here? A mocking voice rang out. Izuku looked up to see Bakugo standing over him, the stolen journal dangling from his fingertips. The blonde's face was twisted into a sneer, his earlier humiliation clearly still fresh in his mind. His red eyes glinted with malice, a stark contrast to the fading afternoon light filtering through the classroom windows. "Give it back," Kakin Izuku said, his voice low and controlled. He stood up slowly, his teal eyes never leaving Bakugo's face. The tension between them was palpable, like a taut wire ready to snap at any moment. Bakugo's sneer deepened, revealing teeth clenched in anger. "Or what, Deku? You'll flip me again?" He waved the journal tauntingly, his movements exaggerated and mocking. "Let's see what kind of useless trash you've been scribbling in here." As Bakugo began to flip through the pages, his expression shifted from mockery to something else, a mix of surprise and grudging admiration. The detailed sketches and meticulous notes were far more comprehensive than he had expected. Each page was filled with intricate diagrams, precise calculations, and insightful observations that spoke volumes of Izuku's analytical skills. "TCH," Bakugo scoffed, trying to mask his reaction. "You really think this will help you become a hero? Pathetic." His voice wavered slightly, betraying a hint of uncertainty that he quickly tried to suppress. Izuku remained silent, his eyes fixed on his journal. The tension in the room was palpable, drawing the attention of the remaining students. Among them, Izumi watched the exchange with a conflicted expression, caught between concern for her brother and loyalty to her friends. Her hands fidgeted nervously at her sides, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Bakugo's eyes glittered with malice as he held Izuku's journal high. With an explosion of his quirk, he burned the cover, leaving dark, angry marks on the once flawless surface. The sharp smell of burning paper filled the room, making some students wrinkle their noses in disgust. "Oops," Bakugo sneered, his voice oozing with feigned innocence. "Looks like your precious little book had an accident." Without warning, he strode to the open window and threw the journal out. The notebook spiraled through the air, its pages fluttering like wounded birds, before softly landing in the koi pond below. The ripples it created disturbed the tranquil surface of the water, much like how Bakugo's actions disturbed the uneasy peace of the classroom. Izuku's face remained expressionless, but he clenched his fists at his sides, his knuckles turning white as he tried to restrain himself. The other students watched in tense silence. Some looked away, unable to bear witness to the cruelty, while others stared with morbid fascination. Bakugo turned to face Izuku, a cruel smirk twisting his expression. "Hey, nerd," he said, speaking in a low and menacing voice. He took a step closer, invading Izuku's personal space, and continued, "If you're so desperate for a quirk, there might be a way." Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of wariness passing through them. Bakugo leaned in, his breath warm against Izuku's ear. "Why don't you take a swan dive off the roof?" he whispered, his words laced with venom. "Who knows? Maybe you'll be lucky and reborn with a quirk in your next life." A collective gasp echoed through the remaining students. Even Bakugo's usual supporters appeared uneasy at the gravity of his words. The air in the classroom seemed to grow heavy, weighted down by the cruelty of the suggestion. Izuku stood motionless, his face an unreadable mask. For a brief moment, the air between them crackled with tension, like the calm before a storm. Then, slowly, deliberately, Izuku turned his head to meet Bakugo's gaze. His teal eyes, usually dull and lifeless, now burned with an intensity that made Bakugo take an involuntary step back. It was as if a switch had been flipped, revealing a side of Izuku that few had ever seen. "Is that what you want, Kakin?" Izuku asked, his voice unnervingly calm. "For me to disappear?" The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions and years of pent-up frustration. After storming out of the room, Bakugo shouldered past the other students roughly. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Once Bakugo was out of sight, Izuku's composure began to crumble. His shoulders started to tremble, a mix of pent-up anger and deep-seated sadness coursing through his body. He clenched his fists tightly, his knuckles turning white as he tried to contain the storm of emotions threatening to break free. Izuku cursed under his breath, the words laden with years of torment and frustration. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and steadied himself. As he opened his eyes, he caught sight of his reflection in the classroom window. The person staring back at him seemed like a stranger tired, with hollow eyes, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. For a moment, Bakugo's harsh words replayed in his mind, and he briefly felt the urge to look down at the ground below. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, and he quickly pushed it away. As Izuku shook his head to clear his thoughts, he noticed his notebook floating in the koi pond. The sight of his hard work drifting aimlessly in the water stirred a mix of determination and defiance within him. The koi swam around it, their colorful scales a stark contrast to the sodden pages of his dreams. With a deep sigh, he gathered his remaining belongings and made his way to the door. Pausing at the threshold, his hand resting on the doorframe, he looked back at the now empty classroom. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desks, giving the room an almost ethereal quality. A bittersweet smile played at the corners of his mouth as he took in the scene. "I'm not giving up," he whispered to the empty room, his voice growing more determined with each word. "Not now, not ever." The words seemed to echo in the silence, a promise to himself and a challenge to the world. With that, Izuku strode into the hallway, his footsteps reverberating in the silent corridor. He had a drenched notebook to retrieve and a dream to pursue, no matter what anyone else thought. As he walked, his back straightened and his chin lifted slightly. The day's events had shaken him, but they had not broken him. If anything, they had only strengthened his resolve. The school corridors were mostly empty now, the other students having rushed home. Izuku's footsteps echoed off the walls as he made his way toward the exit, each step bringing him closer to his waterlogged notebook and, in a way, to his dreams. Despite everything, a small flame of hope still burned within him, refusing to be extinguished by Bakugo's cruel words or anyone else's doubt. Time skip. As Izuku strolled under the bridge, the sense of being followed intensified. The shadows seemed to dance and twist unnaturally, and an eerie silence descended upon the area. The air grew thick and heavy as if weighted down by an unseen presence. Izuku's grip tightened on the strap of his backpack, his knuckles turning white, but his face remained impassive. Years of enduring Bakugo's torment had taught him to mask his emotions well. A subtle smirk played on Izuku's lips as he felt the presence drawing nearer. Without turning, he spoke softly but firmly, his voice carrying a hint of warning. "You know," he addressed the unseen pursuer, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The air filled with squelching and oozing sounds, growing louder with each passing second. Slowly, Izuku turned around, his teal eyes scanning the space behind him. What he saw made his skin crawl. A massive, sludgy figure loomed before him, its form constantly shifting and pulsating like a living nightmare. It towered over Izuku, easily twice his size, with no discernible features save for two glowing, malevolent eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. The stench of sewage and decay emanated from the creature, so potent it made Izuku's stomach churn. The sludge villain's eyes narrowed, fixing Izuku with a predatory gaze. Well, it croaked, its voice reminiscent of thick mud bubbling up from the depths of a swamp. "What do we have here? A young, healthy body, just perfect for my needs." Izuku's smirk remained fixed, a stark contrast to the revolting figure before him. His calm demeanor seemed to infuriate the sludge villain, whose eyes narrowed dangerously, glowing with malice. "Why are you smiling, you little twerp?" It snarled, its voice a guttural growl that echoed ominously in the underpass. Tendrils of slime began to reach out towards Izuku, their movements slow and menacing, like the tentacles of some eldritch horror. Izuku's teal eyes gleamed with an eerie light, his expression unchanging as he watched the approaching tendrils. "You know," he said, his voice unervingly calm, carrying a hint of something dark and dangerous. "Sometimes the most innocent-looking person can harbor the most dangerous secrets." "Is that right, Rika?" Izuku murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The sludge villain's eyes widened in bewilderment, its tendrils pausing mid-advance. "Who the hell is Ri?" Before the villain could finish his sentence, A bone-chilling screech pierced the air, causing the temperature in the underpass to plummet dramatically. An overwhelming sense of dread engulfed them as the sludge villain's form quivered, its eyes darting around frantically, searching for the source of the terrifying sound. Behind the villain, a dark figure materialized out of thin air. It was a sight that defied description, a grotesque and otherworldly being that seemed to be a twisted amalgamation of a young girl and something far more sinister. Long, lank hair covered a face that was half human, half monstrous. Empty eye sockets stared out from beneath a cracked skull, with a deep silt running down the middle of its forehead. Its elongated arms ended in razor-sharp claws that reached out hungrily, eager to tear into flesh. The creature's stance was aggressive, its arms extended outwards threateningly, radiating an aura of pure malevolence. Izuku had been accompanied by Rika, the Queen of Curses, for the past 11 years. Her voice was an unsettling blend of a child's innocence and the malevolence of an eldritch horror as she rasped, "Izuku, this thing. It intends to hurt you." The sludge villain, now caught between Izuku and the terrifying apparition, started to tremble violently. Its liquid form quivered with fear, its eyes frantically shifting between the two threats. What's happening?" It stuttered, all of its earlier confidence evaporating in an instant. "What kind of quirk?" Izuku cut in, his teal eyes glowing with an eerie light, interrupting the villain mid-sentence. A humorless smile played on his lips as he observed the growing panic in the villain's eyes. "Rika is something far beyond what you can understand. It's not just a quirk. She's something else entirely." Rika's form grew larger, her presence filling the underpass with a suffocating sense of dread. Her extended claws inched closer to the sludge villain, the air around them seeming to distort with her power. "Izuku," the echoing, distorted voice of Rika asked, a mix of childlike curiosity and inhuman malevolence, "Shall I tear it apart?" Izuku shut his eyes for a moment, considering. When he opened them again, they were cold with determination, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. "No, Rika," he whispered, his voice carrying a weight of authority that belied his years. Incapacitated, Rika's twisted figure appeared to tremble with excitement, her claws flexing eagerly at the command. "Okay, Izuku," she said, her voice a chilling mix of childlike delight and sinister malevolence that sent shivers down the spine. In an instant, Rika's ghostly form surged forward, moving faster than the naked eye could follow. Her razor-sharp claws sliced through the air, cold as the void itself. The villainous sludge didn't even have time to comprehend what was happening before Rika's assault began. With surgical precision, Rika's claws tore into the villain's liquid form, shredding it into smaller and smaller pieces. The villain's agonized screams reverberated through the underpass, an echoing symphony of pain and terror that seemed to go on forever. When the cacophony finally died down, an eerie silence fell over the underpass. Izuku surveyed the scene before him, his teal eyes taking in every grotesque detail. The once clean concrete was now covered in a thick layer of green sludge, splattered across the walls and pooling on the ground like some macabre artwork. Rika hovered nearby, her form still pulsing with malevolent energy. Izuku could feel her satisfaction radiating through their connection, a twisted sense of pride at a job well done. He allowed himself a small, grim smile before his expression returned to its usual stoic mask. As he stood there, surrounded by the remnants of the villain, Izuku suddenly tensed. His senses, honed by years of hypervigilance, picked up on something new. There was another presence nearby, hidden but unmistakable. "Someone else is here," he murmured, his eyes scanning the area with renewed intensity. The sewage tunnel to his left seemed to be the source of this new presence. Izuku's mind raced, considering the possibilities. Was it another villain lying in wait? A potential witness to the gruesome scene? Or perhaps a hero who had stumbled upon the aftermath? He turned to Rika, his voice low and steady, betraying none of the tension he felt. "Thank you, Rika. You can go now." The cursed spirit seemed to hesitate for a moment, reluctant to leave Izuku alone in potential danger. But she obeyed, her form fading away like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind only a lingering chill in the air. As Rika disappeared, Izuku took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever might come next. He knew he couldn't linger here much longer. Whoever was in that tunnel could emerge at any moment, and he wasn't keen on explaining the scene before him or revealing the true nature of his power. With one last glance at the sludge-covered underpass, a grim reminder of what he was capable of, Izuku turned and walked away. His footsteps were quick but measured, betraying none of the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. As he left the area, his mind was already racing, planning his next move and how to handle the aftermath of this encounter. He had a long way to go, and this was just the beginning of his journey to prove himself in a world that had written him off. Time skip. Yagi residence. Izuku lay on his bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as his mind raced with a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The faint murmur of voices from downstairs caught his attention, piquing his curiosity. With practice stealth honed from years of trying to avoid notice, he quietly slipped off his bed and crept towards the stairs. As he reached the top step, Izuku peered down, his teal eyes widening in surprise. There, standing in the living room, were All Might and Lady Magnet, his parents, in their full hero regalia. The sight of them, so powerful and larger than life, made his heart clench with a complex mixture of awe and bitterness. "Mom and Dad are pro-heroes." Izumi's excited voice rang out, causing Izuku to flinch involuntarily. He'd always harbored suspicions, but hearing it confirmed was another matter entirely. It felt like yet another secret kept from him, another way he'd been pushed to the periphery of his own family. All Might's booming laughter filled the room, a sound that once filled Izuku with hope, but now left a hollow feeling in his chest. Indeed, young Izumi, the hero's voice resonated through the house, its warmth failing to reach Izuku. "And we have an important matter to discuss with you." Izuku leaned in closer, his curiosity overriding his usual caution. He could see Izumi's face, alight with excitement and admiration. It was an expression he used to wear before years of neglect and disappointment had worn it away, leaving behind a mask of indifference. "Izumi," All Might continued, his voice growing serious. The shift in tone made Izuku's skin prickle with anticipation. "I want you to become my successor, to inherit my quirk, one for all." The words hit Izuku like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He felt his breath catch in his throat, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure they must hear it downstairs. His father, his idol, was offering such immense power to his sister? The unfairness of it all threatened to overwhelm him, a tidal wave of emotions he struggled to contain. "But why me?" Izumi asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Izuku found himself leaning even further forward, desperate to hear the answer, clinging to a last shred of hope. "Why not Izuku?" There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. Izuku's heart raced, hope and dread warring within him. Then, All Might's voice, lower this time, shattered what remained of Izuku's world. "I don't think he can be a hero." The words echoed in Izuku's mind, each repetition like a knife twisting in his gut. He stumbled back, nearly losing his balance, his vision blurring as tears threatened to spill over. The world around him seemed to dim, the voices from downstairs fading into a muffled buzz. "But Dad," Izumi protested, her voice seeming to come from far away, "Izuku's been working so hard." "Izumi," Lady Magnet cut in, her voice gentle but firm, a tone Izuku couldn't remember ever being directed at him. "Your father knows best." "Izuku, he's just not cut out for this life." Something inside Izuku snapped. 12 years of neglect, of abuse, of being overlooked and pushed aside, it all came crashing down on him in that moment. He rushed back to his room, slamming the door behind him with a force that shook the walls. The sound echoed through the house, a physical manifestation of his anguish. His eyes darted around wildly, taking in the all-might merchandise that covered every surface. Posters, action figures, even his bedspread, all bearing the face of the man who had just crushed his dreams. The sight of it all, once a source of comfort and inspiration, now felt like a cruel mockery of his aspirations. With a cry of anguish that he barely recognized as his own, Izuku lunged at the nearest poster. He tore it down, his fingers digging into the paper, ripping it to shreds. Then another and another. Action figures were thrown against the wall, shattering into pieces with satisfying crashes. He yanked the all-might bedspread off his bed, tearing it in half with strength born of raw emotion. An hour passed in a blur of destruction. When Izuku finally came back to himself, he was sitting in the middle of his ruined room, panting heavily. Torn posters and broken figures littered the floor around him, a physical manifestation of his shattered dreams. The room, once a shrine to his hero, now looked like a battlefield. As his breathing slowed, a strange calm settled over him. The initial storm of emotion had passed, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. An idea began to form in his mind, crystallizing with each passing moment. "If they don't want me," he muttered, his voice low and determined, "then I'll make it to UA my own way." With newfound determination, Izuku grabbed his backpack and began to pack. He moved with purpose, selecting clothes, his intact notebooks, and some money he'd saved. Each item he packed felt like a step towards a new future, one he would forge for himself, away from the shadows of his family's expectations. As he zipped up the bag, his eyes fell on a blank piece of paper on his desk. He hesitated for a moment, then sat down and began to write. The words flowed from his pen, each one a mix of pain, determination, and a final farewell. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Izumi, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't bother looking for me. You've made it clear where I stand in this family and in your vision of what a hero should be. I'm going to prove you wrong. I don't need your approval or your quirk, All Might. I'll become a hero on my terms. Goodbye, Izuku no longer Yagi." He folded the letter and left it on his desk, a final message to the family that had failed him. Then, with one last look around his destroyed room, a physical representation of his shattered childhood dreams, Izuku opened his window and climbed out into the night. As he dropped to the ground, the cool night air hit his face, bringing with it a sense of both fear and exhilaration. The streets stretched out before him, dark and unknown, but full of possibility. Izuku took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. He didn't know where he was going or what he would do, but he knew one thing for certain. He was never coming back. This was the first step on his new path, one that would lead him to become a hero not for his parents' approval, not for society's acceptance, but for himself. Finally, with each step that took him further from the only home he'd ever known, Izuku felt the weight of his past falling away. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to him. As he walked into the night, a small, determined smile played on his lips. His journey was just beginning. "I'm free." Izumi POV. Mom, Dad, and I were returning from an outing for my birthday. The car ride was filled with laughter and chatter, the radio playing softly in the background. I gazed out the window, watching the city lights blur past, a smile playing on my lips. Yet, a nagging thought kept tugging at the back of my mind, like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. It was Izuku's birthday too, yet he wasn't with us. I pushed the guilt aside, focusing on the warmth of the family around me, the way Dad's eyes crinkled when he laughed, and Mom's gentle hand on my shoulder. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed an unusual stillness about the house. The porch light was off, and no welcoming glow came from the window. Shiver ran down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. Climbing the stairs, my footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway, each creak of the floorboards seeming unnaturally loud. When I reached the top, I saw Izuku's bedroom, door slightly ajar, a thin slice of darkness visible through the gap. A sense of unease crept over me as I approached, my heart beginning to race. I pushed the door open, wincing at the loud creak that broke the silence. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the scene before me. The room was in shambles, clothes strewn about like discarded skins, books torn and scattered like fallen leaves, and the All Might poster that once proudly adorned the wall now lay in tatters on the floor, the hero's smile now a grotesque grimace. What the hell happened? I whispered, my voice trembling. The words hung in the air, unanswered. My eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of the chaos. That's when I spotted a folded piece of paper on Izuku's desk, stark white against the dark wood. With shaking hands, I picked it up, the paper feeling unnaturally heavy. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the words written in Izuku's familiar, messy scrawl. Dear Mom, Dad, and Izumi, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't bother looking for me. You've made it clear where I stand in this family, and in your vision of what a hero should be. I'm going to prove you wrong. I don't need your approval or your quirk, All Might. I'll become a hero on my terms. Goodbye. Izuku no longer Yagi. The words blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. One drop fell onto the paper, smudging the ink, distorting the last goodbye into a watery mess. The weight of my actions, or rather, my inaction over the years, crashed down on me like a physical blow. Memories flooded back. The times I'd laughed along with others who mocked him. The moments I'd chosen to stay silent when I should have spoken up. The countless occasions I'd put my own comfort above his needs. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, clutching the letter to my chest. The carpet was rough against my knees, but I barely noticed. The realization of what I'd done, hit me like a punch to the gut. At that moment, I saw clearly the part I'd played in driving my own brother away. Izuku! I screamed, my voice raw with anguish and regret. The sound echoed through the empty room, bouncing off the bare walls and coming back to me, a stark reminder of the absence it now held. As I knelt there, surrounded by the remnants of Izuku's shattered dreams, I couldn't help but wonder. How had we let things come to this? The All Might figurines that used to stand proudly on his shelves now lay broken on the floor, a metaphor for our fractured family. And more importantly, was it too late to make things right? The silence of the room seemed to mock me, offering no answers, only the crushing weight of guilt and regret. Japan was filled with ancient mysticism before people knew about quirks and the luminescent baby. Jujitsu sorcerers, who used a special power called cursed energy, lived among the people, and they were both admired and feared. These sorcerers protected society from evil curses while controlling their powers. As the sorcerers gained more influence, dark forces grew alongside them. Cursed spirits, created from human negativity, became more common and dangerous. The line between protector and threat blurred, putting the world of jujitsu sorcery in a fragile state. Negative emotions cursed one child after a friend's death. People wondered how this new world of heroes would react to a child affected by ancient curses. Would they accept this powerful but risky individual, or would fear to lead them to reject what they didn't understand? This set the stage for a clash of beliefs, testing humanity's ability to accept differences and marking a crucial moment for both jujitsu sorcery and the emerging world of heroes. A couple of minutes earlier, the evening calm at the Yagi household was shattered by the sudden, unexpected ring of the doorbell. Inko, her green hair tied back in a loose ponytail, wiped her hands on her apron and made her way to the front door, curiosity piqued by the late-night visitor. As she reached for the doorknob, a booming "Happy Birthday, young listeners" exploded through the air with the force of a sonic boom. The sheer volume caught Inko off guard, sending her stumbling backward with a startled yelp, her slippers skidding on the polished wooden floor. In an instant, Tashinori was by her side, his lean form expanding into the muscular frame of All Might. "Are you all right, dear?" he asked, his deep voice laced with concern as he helped Inko to her feet. "I'm fine," Inko assured him, smoothing down her ruffled clothes. "Just a bit startled, that's all." All Might turned towards the door, his heroic instincts kicking in as he prepared to face whatever threat might be lurking outside. However, the familiar voices drifting in quickly dispelled any notion of danger. "For crying out loud, Yamada!" Aizawa's irritated grumble cut through the air. "Do you have to be so loud all the time? Seriously, you idiot!" Namiri chimed in, her voice sharp with annoyance. "You probably woke up the entire neighborhood. Ow, ow. I said I was sorry. Yamato whined pathetically. Namiri, stop hitting me. My head can't take much more abuse. As the dust settled, All Might deflate back into Tashinori, revealing the scene at the doorway. Aizawa stood with his arms crossed, looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Namiri was tapping her foot impatiently, while Yamada nursed two comically large bumps on his head. The sight of the pro heroes in casual wear was almost jarring. Aizawa sported a simple black t-shirt that hung loosely on his frame, a stark contrast to his usual hero attire. Namiri had opted for a stylish blouse and skirt combo that accentuated her curves without being overly revealing. Yamada, true to his loud personality, wore a garishly bright Hawaiian shirt that seemed to scream for attention. Tashinori couldn't help but laugh at the scene, though his amusement was cut short by a fit of coughing that left specks of vital fluid stains on his hand. Wiping his mouth, he asked, "What brings you all here at this hour?" Aizawa's hair began to float ominously, his eyes glowing an eerie red as he fixed Yamada with a withering glare. "We're here for the twins' birthday," he growled, his voice low and menacing, "though I'm seriously reconsidering my decision to come along." Namiri rolled her eyes dramatically, giving Aizawa a playful nudge. "Oh, come on, Shota. Try to have some fun for once in your life." Tashinori chuckled at their antics, his thin frame shaking slightly. "Well, this is certainly a surprise. Though perhaps next time, Hisashi, you could consider knocking instead of announcing your presence to the entire city?" Yamada rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly, his usual bravado dampened by embarrassment. "Yeah, sorry about that. I got a bit carried away with the excitement." Inko, having regained her composure, warmly invited them in. "Izumi will be thrilled to see you all," she said, her smile bright but faltering slightly as she added, "And Izuka too, I'm sure." The shift in Inko's tone wasn't lost on the pro heroes. They exchanged quick, meaningful glances, sensing an undercurrent of tension at the mention of Izuka's name. "Speaking of which," Yamada began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, "where are the birthday Aizu?" His question was abruptly cut off by a piercing scream from upstairs. "Ku." The single syllable, filled with raw anguish, froze everyone in place for a split second. Then, as one, they sprang into action, racing up the stairs with Aizawa in the lead, his capture weapon at the ready. With a swift, powerful kick, Aizawa burst through Izuka's bedroom door. The scene that greeted them was one of utter chaos. The room looked as if it had been hit by a localized hurricane. Posters of heroes hung in tatters from the walls, books and action figures were strewn across the floor, and in the center of it all knelt Izumi, her body racked with heart-wrenching sobs. The adults stood in stunned silence, trying to make sense of the devastation before them. Izumi's cries echoed through the room, a haunting soundtrack to the scene of destruction. As the reality of the situation began to sink in, one thought crystallized in their minds. Something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. Inko rushed to her daughter, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "Izumi, sweetheart, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Izumi looked up at her mother, her face streaked with tears and contorted with guilt. He's gone," she choked out between sobs. "Izuka's run away." Aizawa felt his stomach plummet at the news. With gentle hands, he lifted Izumi, who immediately buried her face in his chest, seeking comfort. "Uncle Aizawa," she whimpered, her voice muffled against his shirt, "it's all my fault. Izuka left because of me." As he held the distraught girl, Aizawa noticed a crumpled piece of paper clutched tightly in her hand. Carefully, he extracted it from her grasp and began to read. With each word, his anger grew, a slow burning fury that threatened to consume him. Without a word, he passed the letter to Yamada and strode purposefully towards Tashinori. In one fluid motion, he drew back his fist and landed a solid punch to the man's jaw. Tashinori stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. Before he could regain his balance, Aizawa's capture weapon snaked out, wrapping around him and yanking him close. "I knew something was wrong," Aizawa hissed, his eyes blazing with barely contained rage. I should have pushed harder when Izuka started talking like this. The kid wanted to keep it secret, but I should have known better. He tightened his grip on the capture weapon, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. If anything happens to my nephew, my student, because of your neglect, you'll answer to me. And believe me, you don't want that. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by Izumi's muffled sobs. Everyone stood frozen, the air thick with unspoken accusations and mounting dread. Wait a minute, Yamada said, breaking the oppressive quiet. He turned to Izumi, his expression a mix of worry and confusion. What did you mean when you said it was your fault? All eyes in the room swiveled to Izumi. She sniffled, trying to compose herself as she wiped away her tears. I need to tell you all something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's not just about me. We need to call the Bakugos and the Todorokis too. And Principal Nizu. They all need to hear this. The heroes exchanged worried glances. Whatever this was, it was clearly bigger than they had initially thought. Aizawa tightened his embrace around Izumi. Are you sure about this, problem child? He asked, his gruff voice tinged with concern. Izumi nodded, her eyes shining with determination despite the tears that still clung to her lashes. Yes, it's time everyone knew the truth. About Izuku, about me, about everything. Toshinori felt a chill run down his spine. What could possibly be so serious that it involved all these people? Namiri stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Izumi's shoulder. All right, sweetheart. We'll make the calls. But first, let's get you some tea to calm your nerves. As they made their way downstairs, Inko spoke up, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and confusion. Izumi, honey, what's going on? What haven't you told us? Izumi looked at her mother, her eyes a storm of guilt and resolve. Mom, there's a lot you don't know. About Izuku, about me, about what's been happening at school. I promise I'll explain everything. Just, not yet. Not until everyone's here. They descended the stairs, the air heavy with unasked questions and mounting tension. As Yamada reached for his phone to make the necessary calls, one thing was abundantly clear. Whatever Izumi had to say was going to change everything. The foundations of their world were about to be shaken, and nothing would ever be the same again. Meanwhile, somewhere in Mizudafu, as the night descended upon Mizudafu, Izuku Yagi found himself wandering the city streets, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. The familiar buildings and landmarks that had once been comforting now seemed to loom over him, silent witnesses to his departure. The cool night air nipped at his skin, sending a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. His backpack, hastily stuffed with whatever essentials he could grab in the moment of his flight, hung heavy on his shoulders. Each step he took seemed to echo in the quiet streets, a constant reminder of the solitude he now faced. The city, usually bustling with life, felt eerily empty at this late hour, mirroring the hollowness in Izuku's chest. To distract himself from the gnawing uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm him, Izuku fumbled in his pocket for his old iPod. The device, a hand-me-down from Izumi that she had long since outgrown, felt comfortingly familiar in his hands. He untangled the earbuds with shaky fingers, grateful for this small, muffled sounds coming from a nearby alleyway. He paused, pulling out one earbud to listen more carefully. The voices were hushed but urgent, laced with an edge that sent chills down his spine. As he peered into the alley, his heart raced at the scene unfolding before him. 6 burly thugs surrounded a young girl, their intentions clearly malicious. "Help me! Please help me!" She cried out frantically, her voice cracking with fear. The leading thug snarled at her, then smirked maliciously. "Don't worry, I won't bite," he taunted, his voice dripping with contempt. "Unless you're willing to give me a good time?" He leered at her, his grimy hands reaching out to unbutton her top until her undertop was clearly visible. The girl, despite her predicament, caught Izuku's attention. She appeared to be around his age, with striking teal eyes that seemed to glow even in the dim light of the alley. Her long orange hair was tied in a high ponytail on the left side of her head, with bangs split into 3 clumps framing her face. Even in her casual wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans, she possessed a certain grace that made Izuku's breath catch in his throat. However, the girl's beauty was overshadowed by the immediate danger she was in. The thugs had knocked her to the ground, their leering faces and wandering hands making their intentions clear. The concrete beneath her scraped against her skin as she struggled, leaving angry red marks. Izuku thought, silently seething with rage. He felt a surge of anger unlike anything he'd experienced before, his blood boiling in his veins. Without a second thought, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a simple mask he'd packed on impulse, a plain black domino mask that covered the area around his eyes. As he slipped the mask over his face, Izuku felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was as if a dam had broken inside him, releasing a flood of energy he never knew he possessed. Unbeknownst to him, a soft pink aura began to shimmer around his body, barely visible in the dim light of the alley. Acting on pure instinct, he dashed forward with surprising speed, aiming for the leader who had pinned the girl to the concrete. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground as he moved, propelled by a force he couldn't explain. Time slowed down as Izuku ran. So, Rika, he thought, reminiscing on her sacrifice to protect that poor boy all those years ago. This is how it was for you, right? Your body just moved on its own. And never forget. Our promise, Izuku. Rika's voice echoed in his head as he ran. He saw a force ghost of Rika, not in her cursed form, but as the young girl he remembered. Beside her stood his younger self, still at the age of 6, wide-eyed and innocent. Become a hero, a real hero. For me, Izuku, she said with a bright and radiant smile, her eyes shining with hope and trust. Thank you, Rika, he replied in his head, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. As the minor hallucination faded, he realized the leader was still holding the girl down, and he was still running at him with full speed. Letting out a battle cry in his mind, Izuku's fist connected with the thug's jaw in a solid right cross. The impact was far greater than Izuku had anticipated. As his fist made contact, arcs of reddish-black lightning crackled around it, amplifying the force of the blow. The thug was sent flying backwards, crashing into a pile of trash cans with a resounding clang that echoed through the alley. The other thugs stood frozen in shock, their eyes darting between their fallen leader and the masked figure that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Izuku himself was momentarily stunned by the power of his own attack, staring at his fist in disbelief as the last sparks of strange lightning faded away. What the hell was that? Izuku wondered, flexing his fingers as the pink aura around him pulsed. This pink aura. It's never happened before, even when I was training with Aizawa-sensei. Who the hell are you? Wailed one of the thugs, his voice quavering with fear. Get that brat! Another shouted, snapping out of his stupor and charging towards Izuku. The other thugs moved towards Izuku, their faces a mix of anger and bewilderment. Izuku felt his heart pounding in his chest, but an unexpected calm washed over him. He took a deep breath, centering himself as he'd seen countless heroes do in their moments of crisis. The first thug lunged forward, his meaty fist aimed straight for Izuku's face. Time seemed to slow down as Izuku's instincts kicked in. He sidestepped the punch with surprising agility, feeling the rush of air as it missed him by mere inches. In one fluid motion, Izuku grabbed the thug's outstretched arm and used the man's momentum against him, sending him stumbling into his companions. The satisfying sound of bodies colliding filled the alley. As the thugs regrouped, Izuku quickly assessed his surroundings. The alley was narrow, lined with dumpsters and discarded cardboard boxes. The limited space would restrict his movement, but it also meant his attackers would have to come at him in smaller groups. His eyes darted around, searching for anything he could use to his advantage. They landed on a discarded metal pipe lying nearby, its dull surface glinting in the dim light. Without hesitation, he snatched it up, the cool metal grounding him in the moment and providing a reassuring weight in his hands. Two more thugs charged at him simultaneously, their faces contorted with rage. Izuku ducked under one swing, feeling the whoosh of air above his head. He blocked another attack with the pipe, the impact sending vibrations up his arm. The metallic clang echoed off the alley walls. Seizing the moment, Izuku countered with a swift kick to one thug's knee, aiming for the vulnerable joint. The man crumpled with a howl of pain that reverberated through the narrow space. The other received a sharp jab from the pipe to his solar plexus, leaving him gasping for air and clutching his midsection. "Who's next?" Izuku asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The remaining thugs exchanged wary glances, their confidence visibly shaken by the unexpected resistance from this masked stranger. The alley fell silent for a moment, save for the labored breathing of the injured men. The two thugs Izuku had knocked down earlier struggled to their feet, groaning and rubbing their sore spots. Their once crisp clothes were now dirty and disheveled, a testament to their unexpected tumble. The leader, nursing his jaw where Izuku's punch had landed, stepped forward with a menacing glare. Vital fluid ran from the corner of his mouth, which he wiped away with the back of his hand. "That hurt, you little brat," he snarled, his earlier smirk replaced by a grimace of pain and anger. His eyes narrowed dangerously as he spat out his next words. "You're dead now." As if on cue, all 6 thugs began to close in on Izuku, forming a tight circle around him. Their eyes gleamed with malice in the dim light of the alley, reminding Izuku of a pack of hungry wolves circling their prey. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Izuku's mind raced, assessing the situation. He was outnumbered and cornered, but strangely, he felt a sense of calm washing over him. The pink aura around him pulsed gently, almost reassuringly, like a protective cocoon. It was barely visible, but Izuku could feel its warmth, a stark contrast to the cold fear that should have been gripping him. 6 on 1, huh? Izuku mused, his voice taking on an eerily calm tone that even he didn't recognize. The thugs, focused on their impending revenge, failed to notice the subtle shift in Izuku's demeanor. They were too busy cracking their knuckles and sneering at what they thought was easy prey. At that moment, Izuku felt a strange urge. He turned slightly, as if addressing an invisible audience beyond the alley walls. Breaking the fourth wall, he spoke with an unexpected hint of humor in his voice, a small smile playing on his lips beneath the mask. "Hey, you guys," he said, his tone light despite the dire situation. "Ever seen Ip Man? Well, check this out." Without waiting for a response, Izuku shifted his stance. His feet moved into position, one slightly forward, his weight balanced perfectly on the balls of his feet. His hands came up, open and relaxed, in a classic Wing Chun guard position. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the nervous, quirkless boy. In his place stood a focused fighter, ready to take on all comers. The thugs paused, momentarily thrown off by Izuku's strange behavior and unfamiliar stance. This hesitation was all Izuku needed. As the first thug lunged forward, Izuku's hands blurred into motion, deflecting the attack with a swift pack saw before countering with a rapid-fire series of chain punches to the man's chest. The thug's eyes widened in shock as each strike landed with precision, driving the air from his lungs. Izuku finished the combo with a roundhouse kick to the face, his foot connecting with a satisfying thud. The thug's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Izuku settled back into his stance, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. The adrenaline coursing through his veins sharpened his senses, making him acutely aware of every movement around him. The dim light of the alley cast long shadows, adding to the tension of the moment. As he prepared for the next attack, a flicker of motion caught his eye. Behind the lead thug, a familiar flash of orange hair streaked through the air. It was the girl he'd come to save, her teal eyes blazing with determination. In a stunning display of agility, she vaulted over the lead thug's broad shoulders, using him as a springboard to launch herself towards a threat Izuku hadn't even noticed. Time seemed to slow as Izuku watched her sail through the air, her body twisting gracefully. Her long orange ponytail whipped behind her, catching the faint moonlight. Her leg extended in a perfect arc, connecting solidly with the face of a thug who had been sneaking up behind Izuku. The impact of her flying dragon kick echoed through the alley, followed by the dull thud of the thug's body hitting the ground. As she landed, light on her feet despite the force of her attack, Izuku felt a rush of admiration. Without a word, they moved in sync, positioning themselves back to back. Izuku could feel the warmth of her presence, a stark contrast to the cool night air. The remaining thugs circled them, their faces a mix of anger and uncertainty. "Nice moves," Izuku murmured, his eyes scanning the remaining thugs who now looked significantly less confident. "Right back at you, mystery hero," the girl replied, her voice tinged with a mix of gratitude and excitement. "I'm Itsuka, by the way. Itsuka Kendo." "Izuku. Nice to meet you, Itsuka," Izuku said, a small smile playing on his lips beneath his mask. "Ready to finish this?" "Yeah, but the lead thug is mine," Itsuka replied, her eyes narrowing towards the burly man who had caused her so much distress. There was a fire in her teal eyes that Izuku couldn't help but admire. With that declaration, the two of them moved in perfect synergy, as if they had been training together for years. Izuku ducked under a wild haymaker, feeling the whoosh of air above his head. On the other side, Itsuka gracefully sidestepped a clumsy kick. In a flash, she grabbed the extended leg, her fingers wrapping around the attacker's ankle. With a strength that belied her slender frame, she brutally smashed her elbow onto the guy's kneecap. The sickening crack that followed made even Izuku wince. The thug howled in pain, his leg now useless. But Itsuka wasn't done. As he swung his arm in a desperate attempt to hit her, she ducked under, her orange ponytail whipping through the air. In one fluid motion, she locked the thug into a suplex, using his momentum against him. The impact as he hit the ground knocked the wind out of him, the sound echoing off the alley walls. Itsuka smoothly transitioned to a top mount position, her face a mask of controlled fury. She rained down a few vicious strikes, her fists connecting with precision. The thug's attempts to block became weaker with each hit, his arms flailing uselessly. Finally, Itsuka raised her elbow high, the moonlight glinting off her determined eyes, and brought it down in a devastating ground elbow smash. The thug's head snapped back, and he went limp, knocked out cold. Meanwhile, Izuku was dealing with his opponent. He clapped his hand against the thug's throat, causing the man to gasp and stumble back, eyes bulging. Seizing the opportunity, Izuku switched stances, his footwork impeccable as he transitioned into a boxing combination. Left jab, right cross, left hook, each punch landed with increasing force, driving the thug back. The sound of fist meeting flesh echoed in the narrow alley. The thug, dazed but still standing, didn't see the spinning back kick coming. Izuku's foot connected solidly with the man's solar plexus, sending him flying. He crashed into the alley wall with a dull thud, sliding down to the ground in a heap, leaving a smear of dirt on the grimy bricks. But the fight was the last thug, seeing his companions fall, charged at Izuku from behind with a roar of rage. Izuku spun around, his fist already in motion. As it connected with the thug's jaw, that strange reddish-black lightning crackled around his hand once more, illuminating the alley with an eerie glow. The impact was tremendous, lifting the thug off his feet and sending him soaring through the air before crashing into a pile of garbage bags. The bags burst on impact, scattering trash across the alley. Just as Izuku thought it was over, movement caught his eye. The lead thug, bruised and battered, had pulled out a gun. His hand shaking with pain and anger, he aimed it at Itsuka, who was still catching her breath after her last fight. The metallic click of the gun's safety being removed seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku's eyes darted around, looking for anything he could use. He spotted a metal pipe lying nearby, knocked loose during the scuffle. Without hesitation, he scooped it up and hurled it with all his might. The pipe whistled through the air, spinning end over end. It struck the thug's gun arm with pinpoint accuracy, eliciting a cry of pain as the weapon clattered to the ground. The sound of metal hitting concrete rang out, followed by the thug's pained groan. Itsuka, alerted by the noise, spun around. Seeing the fallen gun and the thug's pained expression, she didn't hesitate. With a grimace of determination, she delivered a powerful kick right between the thug's legs. The man's eyes bulged, and he let out a high-pitched wheeze before collapsing to his knees. Itsuka stood over him, her chest heaving with exertion, but her eyes still blazing with righteous anger. The alley fell silent, save for the groans of the defeated thugs and the heavy breathing of Izuku and Itsuka. "That," she spat, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and relief, "was for earlier, you creep." Izuka nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over him as he surveyed the scene. The alley was a battlefield of groaning bodies and scattered debris, testament to the fierce fight that had just unfolded. Adrenaline still coursed through his veins, making his hands tremble slightly. The cool night air carried the acrid scent of sweat and fear, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. "Let's leave these fools for the cops," Izuka said, his voice low and steady despite the turmoil of emotions swirling inside him. He reached for his phone, intending to make an anonymous call to the authorities. Before he could dial, Itsuka suddenly wrapped her arms around him tightly. The unexpected contact made Izuka stiffen, unsure how to react. He could feel her body shaking against his, her face pressed into his shoulder. Her warmth seeped through his clothes, a stark contrast to the chill of the night. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice muffled and thick with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." As Itsuka clung to him, Izuku felt a protective instinct surge within him. He awkwardly patted her back, trying to offer comfort while maintaining a sense of propriety. The scent of her shampoo, a faint hint of lavender, mixed with the lingering aroma of the fight. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice gentle. "You're safe now. And you were amazing back there, too. We make a pretty good team." Itsuka pulled back slightly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. A weak smile played on her lips as she looked up at Izuka's masked face. Her teal eyes, still shimmering with unshed tears, seemed to glow in the dim light of the alley. "Yeah, we do, don't we?" she agreed softly. Her gaze lingered on his mask, curiosity evident in her expression. "Can I see your face?" Izuka hesitated for a moment, his heart racing. He glanced around the alley, ensuring they were alone, before slowly pulling off his mask and hoodie. The cool night air kissed his skin as he revealed his features. Itsuka's bright teal eyes met his duller shades, creating a striking contrast between them. Izuka felt a strange flutter in his chest at her smile, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with exertion. He pushed the feeling aside, knowing there were more pressing matters at hand. "We should probably get out of here," he said, glancing around nervously. "I'll call the police, but we shouldn't stick around. Are you okay to walk?" Itsuka nodded, taking a deep breath to compose herself. Her hands smoothed down her disheveled clothes, a futile attempt to regain some semblance of normality. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little shaken up." She paused, biting her lip. Would you mind walking me home? I know it's a lot to ask, but..." "Of course," Izuku replied without hesitation. His voice was firm, reassuring. "Let's go. We can call the police on the way." As they left the alley, stepping out onto the dimly lit street, Izuku couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in his life, he had truly acted like a hero. The weight of his actions, the lives he'd potentially saved, settled on his shoulders not as a burden, but as a mantle of responsibility. He walked beside Itsuka, her presence a comforting warmth in the cool night air. The city around them seemed different now, full of shadows and potential threats, but also opportunities to make a difference. As they made their way through the quiet streets, Izuku realized that this was just the beginning of his journey. Time skip. They arrived at a dojo with a sign that read Tetsu no some Iron Claw above the entrance. Izuku couldn't help but smile at the sight of the traditional-looking building, its warm lights spilling out onto the street, creating a welcoming glow in the darkness. "So this is your home," he said, admiring the well-maintained exterior. The wooden structure had a certain charm, with its sliding doors and tiled roof, a stark contrast to the modern buildings surrounding it. "Yep," Itsuka chirped, a hint of pride in her voice. She approached the door and knocked lightly, her knuckles rapping a familiar pattern. "Okasan, Otosin, I'm home." The door slid open quickly, the sound of wood against wood accompanied by a gust of warm air from inside. An athletic woman with fiery red hair tied back in a messy ponytail and piercing green eyes appeared. She wore a red Hampton jacket over white sweatpants, looking ready for action even at this late hour. "There you are, Shrimp," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of relief and excitement. She pulled Itsuka into a bear hug, lifting the girl off her feet. "I was about to send out a search party." Itsuka squirmed out of the hug, rolling her eyes, but unable to hide her smile. "Mom, I'm fine." "Oh, and I brought someone with me." Itsuka's mom finally noticed Izuku, who was awkwardly shifting from foot to foot. He bowed deeply, feeling like he was under a microscope as her sharp eyes assessed him. "Hideo," she called over her shoulder, excitement creeping into her voice. "Our little Itsuka brought a boy home." She turned back to Izuku, her eyes twinkling with curiosity and a hint of mischief. "What's your name, kiddo?" "Izuku, ma'am," he replied, still bowing, his voice slightly muffled by his position. "Oh, none of that formal stuff. Call me Akane," she said, gently nudging him to stand up straight. She was giving him a once-over like she was trying to figure him out. Her eyes lingered on his scruffy clothes and the way he held himself, a mix of curiosity and concern flashing across her face. Just then, heavy footsteps approached from inside, each step resonating through the wooden floor. A mountain of a man appeared in the doorway, ducking slightly to fit through. He had Itsuka's orange hair, but his kind brown eyes seemed out of place on such an intimidating figure. His muscular frame filled the doorway, and Izuku had to crane his neck to look up at him. "This is my husband, Hideo," Akane said, sounding pretty proud, patting the giant man's arm affectionately. Hideo moved forward with surprising grace for such a big guy. He looked from Itsuka to Izuku, his eyebrows raised in a silent question. "So," he rumbled, his voice deep as thunder but not unkind, "what brings you to our doorstep at this hour, young man?" Izuku took a deep breath, steeling himself. He started explaining what happened, his words tumbling out faster as he recounted the events. As he talked about the thugs in the alley and how he and Itsuka fought them off, the atmosphere in the small entryway grew tense. Hideo listened with his arms crossed, his expression a mix of worry and pride. Itsuka stood tall next to Izuku, nodding along to confirm his story, occasionally adding details he missed. Akane's mood did a complete 180. Her earlier warmth vanished, replaced by a quiet fury that seemed to radiate from her very being. Her red hair started floating, defying gravity as if it had a mind of its own. A red aura shimmered around her, making the air waver like heat rising from pavement on a hot day. When Izuku described what the lead thug tried to do to Itsuka, Akane's eyes disappeared under her bangs, shadowed by her fury. Her fists clenched so tight her knuckles went white, small tremors running through her arms. The red aura got stronger, with little sparks of energy crackling around her like miniature lightning bolts. "Those guys," Akane growled, her voice low and dangerous, barely containing her rage. "How dare they touch my baby girl?" Hideo put a hand on his wife's shoulder, though he looked pretty angry too. His jaw was clenched, a vein pulsing in his temple. "Easy, love," he murmured, his deep voice a soothing rumble. "Our girl's safe, thanks to this young man." Izuku, feeling the tension crackling in the air, quickly added, "Itsuka was amazing too. We fought side by side. She's really tough." He glanced at Itsuka, hoping his words would help calm her parents. Itsuka nodded, putting a hand on her mom's arm. "It's true, Mom. Izuka saved me, but I used everything you and Dad taught me. Those guys didn't know what hit them." Akane's aura slowly faded, her hair settling back down like a retreating tide. She took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm herself. When she looked up, her eyes were a mix of fierce pride and lingering anger. "Thank you, Izuku," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She turned to Itsuka, cupping her face gently. "And you, my brave girl, I'm so proud of you." Hideo nodded, his massive hand resting on Itsuka's shoulder. "You've both shown real guts tonight," he said, his deep voice full of approval. Izuku, we owe you one. Come on in. I think we've got a lot to talk about, and you look like you could use a rest. Izuku was about to politely decline, but then Itsuka hit him with those puppy dog eyes. Man, it was like looking at his sister all over again. He felt his willpower crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. Ah, what the heck? I guess I could hang for a bit, he said, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. Itsuka's face lit up like a Christmas tree, and Izuku felt all warm and fuzzy inside, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. As they headed in, Akane's mom mode kicked into high gear. Her eyes went from soft to steel in 2 seconds flat. Tomorrow, we're having a chat with the cops about those idiots, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Nobody messes with our family and gets away with it. Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine. Mama Bear was not to be messed with, that's for sure. He made a mental note never to get on Akane's bad side. Actually, Izuku piped up, feeling a bit nervous about correcting an adult. I already called the cops. Like half an hour ago, right after we kicked those guys' asses. Hideo's eyebrows shot up so high, they almost left his face. You called the police? He asked, sounding impressed and a little surprised. Izuku nodded, fidgeting a bit under the sudden attention. Yeah, anonymous tip. Figured it was best to let the pros handle it from there. Didn't want to cause any more trouble. You know? Itsuka beamed at him like he just won the Nobel Prize. See? Told you he was awesome, she said, elbowing her dad playfully. Akane's fierce look melted into a smile, her eyes softening as she looked at Izuku. Well, looks like we've got a smart cookie here, she said, sounding pretty pleased. Quick thinking and responsible. I like it. Izuku let out a yawn big enough to swallow Tokyo, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. Hey, Hideo-san, got a spare bed lying around? He asked, rubbing his eyes tiredly. Before Hideo could answer, Akane jumped in with a mischievous grin. Oh, I'm sure Itsuka wouldn't mind sharing her room, she said, winking at the teens. Itsuka's face went redder than a stop sign, her freckles standing out against her flushed skin. Mom, she squeaked, mortified. Izuku wasn't doing much better, his face hot enough to fry an egg, the tips of his ears turning bright red. Hideo chuckled, shaking his head at his wife's antics. All right. Let's not torture the poor kids, he said, trying not to laugh but failing miserably. We've got a guest futon in storage, Hideo told Izuku, his eyes twinkling with amusement. How about we set you up in Itsuka's room next to her bed? Separate, of course, he added with a wink. Izuku nodded, relief washing over him like a cool breeze. That'd be great. Thanks, he said, fighting another yawn. Itsuka, still blushing, nudged Izuku. Sorry about my mom, she whispered, her breath tickling his ear. She's always joking around like this. Akane grinned, not sorry at all. Hey, can't blame a mom for dreaming. She laughed, her eyes dancing with mirth. You two are just too cute together. Okasan, Itsuka groaned, hiding her face in her hands. Izuku just stood there, wishing he could turn invisible or sink into the floor. Ugh, I'm gonna take a shower, Itsuka groaned, her cheeks still pink from her mom's teasing. She shuffled to her room, grabbed some comfy clothes, and headed for the bathroom, shooting Izuku an apologetic look over her shoulder. Okay, honey, Akane called after her, a hint of amusement still in her voice. She turned to Izuku with a wink. Now, let's get you set up, shall we? Izuku nodded, trying not to yawn again. He followed Akane and Hideo into Itsuka's room, feeling a bit awkward about invading her space. The room was cozy, with martial arts posters lining the walls and a few stuffed animals peeking out from the bed. A small desk in the corner was covered in school books and hero magazines, a testament to Itsuka's interests. The air smelled faintly of lavender, and something uniquely Itsuka. All right, kiddo, let's make you a comfy nest, Hideo said, pulling out the futon from a closet. He glanced at Izuku with a grin. Hope you don't mind a bit of snoring. Itsuka gets it from her mom. I do not snore, Akane protested, whacking her husband playfully with a pillow. The pillow made a soft thwomp against Hideo's broad chest, hardly moving the big man. Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at their antics. It felt nice, warm, like a real family, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. As they set up the futon, laying out soft blankets and fluffing pillows, Akane kept sneaking glances at Izuku. Finally, she couldn't hold back anymore. So, Izuku, got any plans for the future? Thinking about being a pro hero? Izuku froze for a second, his hands stilling on the blanket he was smoothing out. Then he shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. Maybe? I haven't thought about it much, he lied, not wanting to get into his complicated history. Hideo raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical but kind. Really? With moves like what you pulled off tonight? Kid, you've got potential written all over you. Izuku felt a warmth spread through his chest at the praise. It was so different from what he was used to hearing. Thanks, he mumbled, not sure how to respond, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. As they finished setting up, they heard the bathroom door open. All yours, Izuku, Itsuka called out, her voice echoing slightly in the hallway. There's a spare toothbrush under the sink if you need it. Izuka grabbed his backpack and headed to the bathroom, grateful for a moment alone to collect his thoughts. What a crazy night it had been, and now here he was, about to sleep in a stranger's house, being treated like he belonged. He splashed some water on his face, staring at his reflection in the slightly steamy mirror. For the first time in a long while, he didn't hate what he saw looking back at him. His green eyes seemed a little brighter, his shoulders a little straighter. Maybe, just maybe, things were looking up. As he brushed his teeth with the spare toothbrush, Izuka couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. For once, he found himself looking forward to finding out. Break. After his shower, Izuka sprawled out on the futon, his body clean but his mind racing. The night's events played on repeat in his head, each replay more vivid than the last. The rush of adrenaline, the fear, the exhilaration, it all swirled together, making sleep seem like a distant impossibility. An hour ticked by, marked only by the soft ticking of a clock and Izuka's restless shifting. Suddenly, a soft whimper pierced the silence. Izuka sat up, his eyes straining through the darkness towards Itsuka's bed. He could make out her form tossing and turning, clearly caught in the grip of a nightmare. Izuka hesitated, torn between the desire to help and the fear of overstepping. Another whimper, this one more distressed, made the decision for him. He rose quietly, padding across the room on bare feet. "Itsuka?" he whispered, reaching out to gently shake her shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now." Itsuka's eyes snapped open, wide and unfocused. For a heart-stopping moment, she looked at Izuku as if he were a stranger, fear clouding her features. Then, recognition dawned, and with a choked sob, she launched herself into his arms. "Izuku," she stammered, her voice muffled against his chest. They were back. The alley. I couldn't. I was so scared. Izuku awkwardly patted her back, his own heart racing at the unexpected closeness. "Shoo, it's all right," he murmured, trying to sound reassuring. "It was just a bad dream. Remember how we handled those guys earlier? We're a pretty good team, right?" Itsuka nodded against him, her breathing gradually slowing. She pulled back slightly, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment in the dim light. "Sorry," she mumbled, not quite meeting his eyes. "I didn't mean to freak out on you like that." Izuka shook his head, offering a small smile. "No need to apologize. After everything that happened tonight, anyone would be shaken up." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the quiet broken only by the distant sounds of the city night. Then, Itsuka spoke, her voice small and hesitant. "Would you maybe stay? Just until I fall asleep?" Izuka felt heat rise to his face, grateful for the darkness that hid his blush. He nodded, managing to keep his voice steady. "Yeah, of course, if it'll help you feel better." He settled next to her on the bed, careful to stay on top of the covers. Itsuka curled up against him, her head finding a spot on his shoulder. Within minutes, her breathing evened out, sleep claiming her once more. Izuku had every intention of sneaking back to his futon once Itsuka was soundly asleep. But the warmth of her beside him, combined with the exhaustion from their eventful day, proved too powerful a lullaby. Before he knew it, His own eyes had drifted shut, soft snores escaping him. In the doorway, Hideo and Akane stood silently, having been drawn by the earlier sounds of distress. They shared a tender smile at the sight of the two teenagers, peacefully asleep and finding comfort in each other's presence. "Should we not let him stay just one night?" Hideo whispered, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the dojo. His eyes darted between Itsuka and the sleeping form of Izuku, concern etched deeply into the lines of his weathered face. The moonlight streaming through the window cast long shadows across the room, giving the scene an almost surreal quality. Akane shook her head, placing a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Nah, let them be," she murmured. "Looks like they both needed this. Besides, I can see in that boy's eyes he's had it rough. A little peace won't hurt him." As they quietly closed the door, Akane leaned against Hideo, a mischievous glint in her eye despite the late hour. "You know," she said, her voice low but playful, "I have a feeling we'll be seeing a lot more of that kid around here." Hideo chuckled softly, wrapping an arm around his wife. "You think so? Well, if he keeps our little Spitfire safe and happy, he's welcome anytime." They made their way back to their own room, leaving the two teenagers to their peaceful slumber. In the quiet of the night, it seemed as if the world had shrunk down to just this moment, this connection forming between two young souls who had found unexpected solace in each other. Meanwhile, the tension in the Yagi house was palpable, thick enough to slice with a knife. The living room was packed to the brim with an eclectic mix of people: the Yagis, Bakugos, Todorokis, and a handful of pro-heroes. Even Principal Nizu, with his enigmatic animal features, perched on the edge of an armchair, his beady eyes scanning the room. The air felt heavy, charged with a volatile cocktail of shock, anger, and guilt. Izumi had just finished her gut-wrenching confession about Izuku's years of torment. Her voice had quivered as she recounted the relentless bullying, not just from Katsuki, but from herself and the Todoroki twins too. As she spoke, the adults' faces had morphed from confusion to horror to barely contained rage. If looks could kill, the Yagis would have been 6 feet under from the death glares they were receiving. Tashinori, once the symbol of peace and strength, now sat with his head in his hands, looking like a deflated balloon. Inko was quietly sobbing into a handkerchief, her small frame shaking with each muffled cry. The pro-heroes exchanged dark glances, their hands clenching into fists at their sides, knuckles turning white with suppressed anger. But trust Katsuki to pour gasoline on an already raging fire. The explosive teen, seemingly oblivious to the room's mood, decided to open his big mouth. "Heh, why should we care about that useless Deku?" he sneered, lounging back in his chair with an air of arrogant nonchalance. "He probably died in a ditch somewhere by now." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mitsuki's face turned an alarming shade of red, her eyes bulging as she visibly struggled to contain her fury. But someone else beat her to the punch. Literally. Wham! The sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Everyone's jaws hit the floor as they watched mild-mannered Masaru Bakugo, of all people, deck his son. Katsuki's head snapped back, vital fluid spraying from his nose in a crimson arc. "What the hell?" Old Ma Katsuki sputtered, his eyes wide with shock as he cupped his bleeding nose, crimson seeping between his fingers. Masaru stood over him, his usually gentle features twisted with a fury no one had ever seen before. His glasses were askew, and a vein pulsed in his forehead as he glared down at his son. "That's something your mother wanted me to do for a long time," he growled, flexing his hand. "It's about time someone put your butt in line." "Masaru," Mitsuki whistled, looking at her husband with a mix of surprise and admiration. "Didn't know you had it in you." Aizawa stepped forward, his capture weapon floating ominously around him like a sentient scarf and his eyes glowing an eerie red. "As much as I enjoy watching the brat get what he deserves," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "we have more pressing matters to attend to." Niza nodded, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a grim determination. His beady eyes were sharp and focused as he turned to Izumi. "Indeed. Izumi dear, please continue. We need to know everything, no matter how difficult it may be to hear. Izumi took a shaky breath, wringing her hands in her lap. Her green hair, so much like Izuku's, fell over her face as she bowed her head. It wasn't just Kakin and us kids, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The teachers at school, As Izumi continued her story, detailing the negligence and even encouragement of the bullying from the school staff, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The pro-heroes exchanged dark looks, their expressions a mix of horror and rage. Yamada's usual grin had twisted into a snarl, while Namuri's nails dug into her palms so hard they nearly drew vital fluid. The room listened in stunned silence as Izumi recounted incident after incident. Teachers turn a blind eye to Izuku's bruises, praising Katsuki's assertiveness when he uses his quirk on Izuku, even joining in on the Deka nickname. With each revelation, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with unspoken fury and guilt. They told him to take a swan dive off the roof. Izumi choked out, tears streaming down her face. Said maybe he'd get a quirk in his next life. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Inko's sobs grew louder, while Tashinori seemed to age years and seconds. The pro-heroes' faces were a study of barely contained rage, their quirks activating unconsciously in response to their emotions. Enji Todoroki, known professionally as the Flame Hero, Endeavor was a sight to behold. His towering frame, sculpted by years of intense hero work, seemed to dominate the room even as he sat in silence. His short, spiky crimson hair stood in stark contrast to his sharp turquoise eyes, which now blazed with an intensity that matched the flames that made up his beard and mustache. Throughout the meeting, Endeavor had been uncharacteristically quiet, his massive frame radiating heat that seemed to reflect the anger simmering just beneath the surface. As the revelations about Izuku's treatment continued, the flames that made up his facial hair flickered more intensely, casting eerie, dancing shadows across his sharp features. His hero costume, a tight navy turquoise bodysuit adorned with streams of flames across his chest, upper torso, arms, and shoulders, seemed to pulse with barely contained energy. The flames around his eyes, serving as a makeshift mask, flickered and danced, mirroring the turmoil within. Suddenly, unable to contain his rage any longer, Endeavor stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, the harsh sound cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. The room fell into an immediate, heavy silence as all eyes turned to the number 2 hero. Flames danced around his clenched fists, the heat emanating from him causing the air to shimmer. His turquoise eyes, usually cool and calculating, now blazed with a fury that made even the bravest heroes in the room flinch. "I'm going to burn that cursed school to the ground," he growled, his voice low and dangerous, reminiscent of the rumble before an avalanche. The temperature in the room seemed to rise several degrees as his quirk responded to his anger, the air becoming thick and oppressive. Then, with a swiftness that belied his massive frame, he turned his gaze to his children, Shoto and Shoka. The twins, despite their own formidable quirks, visibly flinched under their father's intense stare. A mixture of anger and disappointment was evident in his eyes, the flames of his beard casting flickering shadows across their faces. "I'm ashamed of you too," Endeavor said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of a thunderclap. The words hung in the air, heavy with years of complicated history and unspoken emotions. Shoto, his heterochromatic eyes flashing with defiance, crossed his arms and scoffed. "Heh, like you care. Shitty father." His voice dripped with disdain, years of resentment packed into those few words. "Nichan," Shoko exclaimed, her eyes wide with shock at her brother's boldness. Unlike her twin, she seemed torn between fear of her father's reaction and a desire to defuse the situation. In a flash that left everyone gasping, Endeavor's hand shot out, grabbing Shoto's shirt collar. The fabric began to smoke as the hero's flames intensified, licking at his son's clothes. The air crackled with tension and the smell of singed fabric. "Listen here, you little twerp," Endeavor snarled, his face inches from Shoto's. The flames of his beard roared higher, the heat becoming almost unbearable for those nearby. I know you, Shoka, and Natsuo hate me, but I'm trying, damn it. I'm trying to be a better father for you all. His voice cracked slightly, a rare show of vulnerability from the usually stoic hero. The flames around his face flickered, momentarily revealing the man beneath the inferno. I failed so many times. Toya, Rei, Fuyumi. He trailed off, pain flashing across his face before his anger returned to full force. With a roar of frustration, he whirled to face Tashinori, his flames roaring higher, licking at the ceiling. I spent so much trying to surpass this guy, who was nothing but disappointment. The room was thick with tension, the other heroes shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. The heat from Endeavor's quirk was becoming oppressive, causing sweat to bead on everyone's foreheads. It was Nizu who finally broke the standoff, his calm voice cutting through the crackling of Endeavor's flames like a cool breeze. Enji, stop using your quirk, the principal said firmly, his small frame seeming to grow with authority. Before we resort to arson. And also, put your son down. Despite his diminutive stature, Nizu's voice carried an edge of steel that even the flame hero couldn't ignore. His beady eyes fixed on Endeavor with an intensity that matched the hero's own. I believe we need to address the root of the problem. And that starts right here, in this room. Slowly, reluctantly, Endeavor released Shoto and extinguished his flames. The sudden absence of the fire's heat left the room feeling cold and empty, a stark contrast to the inferno of moments before. As he sat back down, his chair creaking under his weight, the other occupants of the room couldn't help but feel that a significant shift had occurred. Nizu's beady eyes swept across the room, his gaze piercing through the tense atmosphere. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows on his fur, making him appear almost ominous despite his small stature. He took a deep breath, his tiny paws clasped together on the polished table. Tashinori and Inko Yagi, he began, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. You have failed in your most fundamental duty as parents. The evidence before us is damning, and the consequences must be severe. He paused, letting his words sink in. Therefore, you will both be losing custody of Izuka Yagi once he's found. Inko's quiet sobs intensified, her shoulders shaking violently as she buried her face in her trembling hands. The sound of her grief was a stark contrast to the sterile silence of the room. Tashinori, on the other hand, remained stone-faced, his jaw clenched so tight that a muscle twitched visibly beneath his skin. Nizu's gaze fixed on Tashinori, his eyes narrowing slightly. Furthermore, when you retire as All Might, this transgression will be made public. The #1 hero spot will go to someone else. At this, Tashinori's carefully constructed facade cracked. His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles turning white, the veins in his forearms bulging with the strain. The other heroes in the room shifted uncomfortably, almost feeling the waves of anger radiating off him. It was clear to everyone present that it wasn't the loss of his son that fueled his rage, it was the threat to his legacy, his precious #1 spot. Turning to the younger generation, Nizu's voice grew even sterner, his beady eyes narrowing as he addressed them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. As for Izumi, the Bakugo and Todoroki twins, your actions have consequences. You will be blacklisted from all hero schools except UA. Should you fail the entrance exam, no recommendations will be accepted. Your path to becoming heroes ends here. The room fell into a stunned silence as the weight of Nizu's words sank in. Izumi's face paled, the color draining from her cheeks as her hands began to tremble visibly. Katsuki's jaw clenched, a vein pulsing prominently in his forehead as he struggled to contain his rage, his red eyes blazing with fury. The Todoroki twins exchanged worried glances, their heterochromatic eyes wide with the sudden realization of the gravity of their situation. Nizu then turned his attention to Izumi, his voice softening slightly, but still carrying an undercurrent of steel. And Izumi, I forbid you to use One for All until Sir Night-Eye has a chance to speak with you and Izuka's half-sister about potentially transferring it to her. Izumi's eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water as she tried to process this new information. Half-sister, she whispered, her voice barely audible, cracking with disbelief. Inko, who had been quietly sobbing, suddenly went still. Her tear-stained face slowly lifted, her puffy red eyes locking onto Tashinori with a mixture of disbelief and fury. The room seemed to hold its breath as she stood up, her small frame shaking with emotion. The tension in the room reached its breaking point with a resounding crack that shattered the stunned silence. Inko's palm connected with Tashinori's cheek, the force of the slap so powerful it whipped his head to the side. A bright red mark bloomed on his skin, stark against his pale complexion. "How long?" Inko demanded, her voice a trembling mix of fury and anguish. Her usually neatly styled green hair was now disheveled, framing her face like a wild halo. Her eyes, normally soft and kind, blazed with a mixture of hurt and anger that seemed to bore into Tashinori's very soul. Tashinori, the #1 pro hero known as All Might, the symbol of peace and strength, suddenly appeared small and vulnerable. His usual larger-than-life presence seemed to shrink, his broad shoulders hunching as if under an invisible weight. The confident smile that usually adorned his face had vanished, replaced by a look of uncertainty and fear. What do you mean by that?" He managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. The stutter in his speech was a stark contrast to his usual eloquence, betraying the turmoil within. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. His feeble attempt at evasion only served to stoke the flames of Inko's rage. "Don't play coy with me, damn it," she shouted, her usually gentle demeanor completely shattered. Her voice rose to a pitch that made everyone in the room wince and instinctively lean back in their chairs. The raw emotion in her words seemed to vibrate in the air, making the atmosphere thick and suffocating. "How long have you been cheating on me?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade, poised to fall and change everything. The other occupants of the room held their breath, frozen in place by the intensity of the moment. They were unwilling spectators to this deeply personal confrontation, unable to look away, yet feeling like intruders in a private tragedy. Tashinori's eyes darted around the room, desperate for an escape from the accusation that hung in the air like a toxic cloud. His gaze flitted from face to face, finding no solace in the stern expressions of his colleagues or the hurt etched into Inko's features. The walls of the conference room seemed to close in on him, trapping him with the weight of his secrets. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the truth that was about to come crashing down. His broad shoulders, usually held high with the confidence of the symbol of peace, now slumped in defeat. The fight drained from him, leaving behind a shell of the man he pretended to be. As the silence stretched on, Tashinori's appearance seemed to age before their eyes. The lines on his face deepened, etching the weight of his secrets into every crevice. His usually vibrant blonde hair seemed duller, as if the very life was being sucked out of him by the impending confession. He swallowed hard again, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. His hands, capable of delivering earth-shattering punches, now trembled slightly as he clasped them together on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, cracking with the strain of his admission. "Since you were prego with Izuku and Izumi," he said, the words tumbling out like stones, heavy and irretrievable. He couldn't bring himself to meet Inko's gaze, instead focusing on a spot on the table, as if it held the answers to fix this mess he had created. The silence that followed was deafening, a heavy blanket of tension settling over the room. Inko stood there, frozen, her eyes wide and unblinking as the full weight of Tashinori's confession crashed down upon her. The color drained from her face, leaving her complexion ashen and sickly. Her hands, which had been clenched into tight fists at her sides, now trembled visibly. For what felt like an eternity, the only sound in the room was the soft ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching out painfully. Then, Inko took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly as she gathered her strength. When she finally spoke, her voice was eerily calm, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging behind her eyes. After this meeting is over, she said, each word carefully measured and deliberate, "You and I are getting a divorce. I'm done with you, Tashinori Yagi." The finality in her tone left no room for argument or plea. It was as if she had drawn a line in the sand, separating her past life from the future she now faced alone. Mitsuki, who had been watching her friend with growing concern, immediately sprang into action. She rushed to Inko's side, her movements quick and purposeful. Gently, she wrapped her arms around Inko's shaking form, offering silent support and comfort. As Mitsuki guided Inko back to her seat, she turned her head to fix Tashinori with a glare so intense it could have melted steel. Her red eyes, usually warm and full of life, now flashed with a mixture of contempt and righteous anger. The look spoke volumes, conveying without words the depth of her disgust and disappointment in the man she had once respected. Inko allowed herself to be led, her steps unsteady as the shock began to give way to a bone-deep weariness. As she sank into her chair, the reality of her situation seemed to crash over her anew. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment she looked small and vulnerable, a far cry from the strong, nurturing mother she had always been. Mitsuki kept a protective arm around her friend, her presence a silent promise of support in the difficult days to come. The room remained silent, the air thick with unspoken words and shattered trust. Tashinori sat there, his face a mask of fury, his fists clenched at his sides, knuckles turning white as he silently seethed. "Curse you, little twerp," he cursed mentally, his thoughts turning to Izuku and the mess his disappearance had caused. The vein in his forehead pulsed dangerously, his teeth gritted so hard they seemed in danger of cracking. Meanwhile, Katsuki and Shoto were lost in their world of rage. Their faces were contorted with fury, fists clenched so tight their nails dug into their palms, leaving crescent-shaped marks. Though they remained silent, their thoughts were in perfect, vengeful sync. "Deku, I'll kill him." The air around Katsuki crackled with small explosions, while the temperature around Shoto fluctuated wildly between freezing and scorching. Mitsuki broke the tense silence, her voice uncharacteristically quiet, a stark contrast to her usual boisterous demeanor. "What about Izuku? What are we doing to find him?" Nisa's ears twitched a subtle movement that drew all eyes to him. "I already have somebody looking for him. Every available hero will be on the lookout." He paused, his small frame seeming to deflate slightly, the weight of the situation evident in the slump of his shoulders. "But," he continued, his voice heavy with implication, "given the circumstances, we must prepare ourselves for the possibility that Izuku may not want to be found." A collective shudder ran through the room at the implications of Nizu's words. The weight of their actions, the years of neglect and abuse, settled heavily on their shoulders like a physical burden. The silence that followed was thick with guilt, regret, and the dawning realization of the magnitude of their failures. Back at the Iron Claw Dojo, a figure hovered silently in the air, his presence undetected by the sleeping occupants below. Moonlight spilled through the window, casting an ethereal glow on his snow-white hair. He wore a dark blue zip-up jacket with a high collar that rustled softly in the night breeze. His slim-fit black pants and polished dress boots completed the ensemble, giving him an air of understated elegance. The most striking feature, however, was the white bandages covering his eyes. Despite this apparent blindness, he seemed to observe the scene below with keen interest, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something beyond normal hearing. The bandages moved slightly with each subtle shift of his expression, hinting at the eyes hidden beneath. His attention was focused on the sleeping form of Izuku, curled up next to Itsuka. A faint, pinkish aura surrounded the boy, barely visible to the naked eye, but clear as day to the floating observer. The aura pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, occasionally flickering with bursts of energy. "So, this is the boy that Nizu wanted me to find," the man mused, his voice barely a whisper. "His cursed energy is strong. I can tell." He paused, taking in the peaceful scene before him. The dojo was quiet, save for the soft breathing of the sleeping teens and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor. He floated closer, careful not to disturb the sleeping teens. The floorboards beneath him didn't even creak, as if he weighed nothing at all. As he approached, the pink aura around Izuku seemed to respond, growing slightly brighter before settling back down. The man's lips curved into a small smile, a mix of curiosity and anticipation. "Izukayagi," he murmured, his voice carrying a hint of both awe and excitement. "You'll be interesting to train." His fingers twitched slightly, as if itching to begin molding this raw talent before him. As if responding to his words, the aura around Izuku flickered again, growing noticeably brighter for a moment before settling back down. The man's eyebrows rose behind his bandages, intrigued by this unconscious display of power. He leaned in closer, studying the aura's patterns and fluctuations. Responsive even in sleep, he noted, his voice tinged with fascination. Raw potential, but uncontrolled. We'll need to work on that. He straightened up, his mind already racing with potential training regimens and exercises. He hovered there for a few more moments, seemingly deep in thought. His head tilted from side to side, as if weighing different options or considering various paths forward. Then, with a barely audible sigh that carried both anticipation and a hint of concern, he began to float towards the window. "Rest well, young Izuku," he said softly, his voice carrying a mix of encouragement and warning. "Your real journey begins soon, and it won't be an easy one." With that, he slipped out into the night, his form melding seamlessly with the shadows. The only trace of his presence was a lingering sense of anticipation in the air, a promise of challenges and growth to come. The dojo fell back into silence, its occupants blissfully unaware of the watchful eyes that had been upon them, or the destiny that was slowly unfurling for the black-haired boy with green streaks sleeping peacefully below. As the mysterious figure disappeared into the night, a gentle breeze rustled through the dojo, carrying with it the faint scent of cherry blossoms. It was as if the very air was whispering of the changes to come, of the trials and triumphs that lay ahead for Izuku and his newfound family at the Iron Claw Dojo. Morning. Iron Claw Dojo. The teal eyes of Itsuka Kendo fluttered open as warm morning sunlight filtered through her curtains, casting a soft glow across her face. She stirred, stretching her arms above her head with a quiet yawn. As she attempted to rise from her bed, she noticed an unusual weight holding her down. That's strange," she mumbled, her voice still thick with sleep. "The blankets weren't this heavy last night." Puzzled, Itsuka tugged at the covers, revealing a mop of messy, jet-black hair resting on her pillow. Her eyes widened as she pulled the blanket back, exposing Izuku's sleeping form beside her. A deep blush rapidly spread across her cheeks as she let out a startled squeak, quickly covering her mouth to stifle the sound. "Why is he in my bed?" she thought, her heart racing. Then, like a flood, memories of the previous night washed over her. The nightmare that had jolted her awake, the paralyzing fear, and Izuku's comforting presence. "Oh, right," she realized, her blush fading slightly as understanding dawned. Deciding it was time to get up, Itsuka carefully attempted to extricate herself from the bed without disturbing Izuku. She gingerly swung one leg over his body, trying to climb over him. However, her movements caused the bed to shift, and Izuku began to stir. Itsuka froze, caught in an awkward position straddling Izuku just as his eyes slowly opened. Their gazes locked, teal meeting emerald, and time seemed to stand still for a moment. Then, as if on cue, both faces flushed bright red. Before either of them could react or speak, fate intervened. The door to Itsuka's room creaked open, and Akane poked her head inside. Her eyes took in the scene before her. Itsuka awkwardly positioned over Izuku, both teenagers red-faced and wide-eyed. Instead of the shock or anger they might have expected, Akane's lips quirked into a small, knowing smile. "Breakfast is ready for you too," she said calmly, as if finding her daughter in such a compromising position with their new house guest was an everyday occurrence. Without another word, She closed the door, leaving Izuku and Itsuka alone once more. The silence that followed was deafening. Itsuka and Izuku stared at each other, mortified and unsure of what to say. Finally, Izuku cleared his throat. I should probably get up now, he managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. Itsuka nodded vigorously, scrambling off him and nearly tumbling to the floor in her haste. Why, yes, of course. I'll just go first and, see you at breakfast. She dashed to the bathroom, leaving a bewildered Izuku behind. Leaning against the closed door, Itsuka groaned softly. I want to die, she whispered, her face burning with embarrassment. But underneath the mortification, there was a fluttery feeling in her chest she couldn't quite place. Meanwhile, Izuku sat up slowly, his mind reeling. He glanced at the warm spot where Itsuka had been, a mix of confusion and something softer swirling in his chest. What just happened? He wondered aloud, running a hand through his messy hair. As he got up, his foot caught on the blanket, causing him to trip. With a yelp, he tumbled to the floor, landing with a thud. Ow, he grumbled, rubbing his elbow. What a great start to the day. Izuku. From downstairs, Akane's voice called up. Everything okay up there? Fine. Izuku and Itsuka called out in unison, then caught each other's eyes through the now open bathroom door. They burst into nervous giggles, the tension breaking slightly. Well, Itsuka said, a small smile on her lips. This is not how I thought my morning would go. Izuku chuckled, getting to his feet. Me neither. But it's not so bad, right? Itsuka's smile widened a bit. No, she said softly. I guess it's not. Let's go, Izuku said, a nervous smile playing on his lips. All right, Itsuka replied, her cheeks still tinged with a faint blush from their earlier encounter. As they settled into their seats, Hideo passed Izuku a plate piled high with steaming rice, perfectly grilled fish with a golden brown crust, and an array of colorful vegetables. The aroma wafted through the air, making Izuku's stomach growl audibly. Eat up, son, Hideo said warmly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You look like you could use a good meal. Izuku nodded gratefully, picking up his chopsticks with slightly trembling hands. As he took his first bite, savoring the delicate balance of flavors, his attention was caught by the low murmur of the television playing in the background. A familiar name made him pause mid-chew, his ears perking up. Hideo-san, Izuku said, swallowing quickly and setting down his chopsticks. Could you turn up the volume on the TV, please? Hideo reached for the remote, raising an eyebrow at Izuku's sudden interest. The volume increased, and a news anchor's voice filled the room, her tone serious and professional. Breaking news, the anchor announced, her expression grave. Aldra Junior High and several other quirk supremacy-based schools have been shut down due to widespread discrimination against students with villain-type quirks or those who are quirkless. Izuku's chopsticks clattered to the table, his eyes widening in shock. Itsuka, sitting next to him, placed a comforting hand on his arm, her touch warm and reassuring as she sensed his distress. The anchor continued, her voice steady but tinged with a hint of disbelief. In related news, the parents of a 16-year-old girl with a villain-type quirk have been arrested on multiple charges. The quirk in question allows the user to transform by ingesting the vital fluid of others. The parents face 2 counts of child abuse, child endangerment, and aggravated assault. They have been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A collective gasp went around the table. Akane shook her head, her expression a mix of sadness and anger, her fingers tightening around her chopsticks. How could parents do that to their child? She murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The teenager, the anchor went on, her tone softening slightly, has been placed in the care of pro-hero Vlad King, who has experience with blood-related quirks. As the news segment ended, a heavy silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the soft clink of cutlery and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Izuku stared at his plate, his appetite suddenly gone, the once appetizing food now looking unappetizing. The story of the girl with the villain-type quirk hit too close to home, reminding him of his struggles and the cruelty he had faced. Itsuka squeezed his arm gently, Her teal eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay, Izuku?" she asked, her voice soft and caring. Izuku took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on him. I don't know," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "It's just, I can't help but think about how many other kids like me, like that girl, are out there suffering because of how society views their quirks, or lack thereof." Hideo leaned forward, his expression serious, the lines on his face deepening. "It's a sad reality, but it's good that these issues are finally coming to light. Change can only happen when people are forced to confront the truth." Akane nodded in agreement, reaching across the table to pat Izuku's hand. "And remember, Izuku, you're not alone anymore. You have us now, and we'll support you no matter what." Izuku looked around the table, taking in the kind faces of the Kendo family. For the first time in years, he felt a warmth spreading through his chest, the feeling of belonging, of being accepted. Despite the heavy news, a small, hesitant smile found its way to his lips. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you. I don't know what I did to deserve this kindness, but I'm grateful." Itsuka stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked towards Izuku, her teal eyes filled with a mix of compassion and understanding. As she approached, Izuku felt his heart quicken, unsure of what to expect. Without hesitation, Itsuka wrapped her arms around him in a warm embrace. The hug caught Izuku off guard. For a moment, he sat rigid and used to such physical affection. But as Itsuka held him, he felt the tension in his body slowly melt away. Her warmth seemed to seep into him, filling the cold, empty spaces that years of loneliness had carved out. "You were alone mostly all your life," Itsuka murmured, her breath tickling his ear. She pulled back slightly, her hands resting gently on it. "I'd say that you are deserving of love, Izuku. More than you know." Izuku felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the sincerity in Itsuka's words and the kindness in her eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he found himself leaning into her embrace once more, his arms hesitantly wrapping around her waist. As they hugged, Izuku felt something warm and wet on his cheek. It took him a moment to realize he was crying, silent tears sliding down his face. But for once, these weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a burden slowly being lifted. Akane and Hideo exchanged a glance, their eyes soft as they watched the scene unfold. They knew that healing would take time, but this moment, this simple act of kindness and acceptance, was a crucial first step. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Izuku found himself able to eat again, the knot in his stomach slowly loosening. He couldn't shake the feeling that this news was just the beginning of something bigger, changes that would ripple through society and perhaps, just perhaps, make the world a little fairer for people like him. After breakfast, Hideo clapped his hands together, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "All right, kids," he exclaimed, pushing back his chair. "Time to work off those calories. To the dojo." Izuku and Itsuka exchanged eager glances, a mix of anticipation and nervousness flickering across their faces. They quickly changed into workout clothes, Izuku borrowing a spare set from Hideo that hung loosely on his lean frame, and Itsuka donning her well-worn GI, the fabric soft from years of use. As they entered the family dojo, the familiar scent of polished wood and sweat greeted them. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the gleaming wooden floor and the array of training equipment lining the walls. The air hummed with quiet energy as if the room itself was anticipating the upcoming session. Hideo stood in the center of the dojo, his presence commanding yet approachable. The wooden floorboards creaked softly under his feet as he shifted his weight, his eyes scanning the eager faces of Izuku and Itsuka. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the room and highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. "Today," Hideo announced, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and authority, "we're diving into Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu." He turned to Izuku, curiosity glinting in his eyes. "Izuku, have you ever tried these before?" Izuku shook his head, a determined look settling on his freckled face. His teal eyes sparkled with anticipation as he replied, "No, sir. But I'm eager to learn. That's the spirit." Hideo grinned, clapping Izuku on the shoulder. The boy stumbled slightly under the friendly pat, and used such casual physical contact. "Let's start with some basic Muay Thai stances. Watch closely, both of you." For the next hour, the dojo was filled with the rhythmic sounds of controlled breathing and bare feet shifting on the mat. The air grew thick with the scent of exertion as Hideo guided them through punches, kicks, and elbow strikes. His keen eyes caught every misstep, offering corrections with patience and encouragement. Izuku, to everyone's surprise, including his own, was a quick learner. His movements, initially awkward and hesitant, became more fluid with each repetition. He found himself lost in the rhythm of the strikes, his mind clearing all thoughts except the next move, the next stance. "Nice job, Izuku," Itsuka cheered, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her ginger hair, tied back in a ponytail, was damp with perspiration. She couldn't help but feel impressed by his progress, a hint of competitive spirit rising within her. Izuku smiled shyly, his face flushed from exertion and the unexpected praise. "Thanks, Itsuka. You're amazing too." He marveled at how natural the movements felt to her, her body flowing from one stance to another with practiced ease. As they transitioned to jiu-jitsu, the atmosphere in the dojo shifted. The mat beneath their feet felt different, softer yet more unyielding. Hideo demonstrated various holds and escapes, his movements precise and controlled. Izuku found this more challenging, his lack of experience showing as Itsuka easily pinned him several times. But with each failure, Izuku's determination only grew stronger. He paid close attention to Hideo's instructions, his mind working overtime to memorize every detail. The feel of the mat against his back, the pressure of Itsuka's hold, the way his own body responded to each movement. He absorbed it all, storing it away for future use. "All right," Hideo announced, a glint in his eye that made both teens straighten up. "Time for some sparring. Izuku, Itsuka, you're up." The two faced each other in the center of the mat, nervous grins mirroring each other. Itsuka bounced lightly on her toes, her body coiled with anticipation. Izuku took a deep breath, trying to remember everything he'd just learned, his hands slightly shaky as he raised them into a defensive position. "Don't hold back," Hideo called out from the sidelines, his voice echoing in the now silent dojo. "Show me what you've got." Itsuka made the first move, her fist cutting through the air with precision. Izuku's eyes widened as he barely managed to twist his body, the punch grazing his cheek. The rush of air against his skin sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. Instinctively, he dropped low, his leg sweeping out in a kick that surprised both of them with its speed and accuracy. Itsuka jumped back, a grin spreading across her face. "Not bad, Izuku." Her voice held a mix of surprise and approval. They circled each other, eyes locked, bodies tense. The wooden floor creaked beneath their feet, the sound mixing with their heavy breathing. Itsuka feinted left, then struck right, her fist connecting with Izuku's shoulder. He stumbled but used the momentum to spin, his elbow nearly catching Itsuka's chin. The dojo echoed with the sound of their rapid movements, feet shuffling on the mat, fists and legs cutting through the air. Izuku's inexperience showed in his sometimes awkward stance, but his quick reflexes and unpredictable style kept Itsuka on her toes. She found herself having to think 2 steps ahead, never quite sure where Izuku's next move would come from. Suddenly, Itsuka saw her chance. She dropped low, her legs sweeping out in a smooth arc. Izuku felt his feet leave the ground, his world tilting as he fell. But something inside him surged, a hidden instinct taking over. In a move that left everyone watching in awe, Izuku's hand shot out, fingers splayed against the mat. His body coiled like a spring, muscles tensing in perfect synchronization. Then, in one fluid motion, he pushed off with his hand, his body twisting in midair. Time seemed to slow as he completed a full backflip, the world spinning around him in a blur of colors. He landed in a perfect defensive stance, knees bent, hands raised, his eyes wide with surprise at his actions. "Whoa!" Itsuka exclaimed, her eyes wide with amazement. Where did that come from? She stood frozen, her planned follow-up attack forgotten in the face of Izuku's unexpected acrobatics. Izuka blinked, just as surprised as everyone else. He looked at his hands, then back at Itsuka, a shy grin spreading across his face. I'm not sure," he admitted, his voice tinged with wonder. "It just felt right, you know? Like my body knew what to do before my brain could catch up." Hideo nodded approvingly from the sidelines, his eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. He'd seen many talented students over the years, but there was something different about Izuku, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The sparring continued, each of them pushing the other to their limits. Itsuka's well-honed technique clashed with Izuku's raw instinct and unpredictability. She would set up a complex series of strikes, only for Izuku to slip through her defenses in a way she couldn't have anticipated. It was like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. As they grappled, bodies intertwined in a test of strength and skill, Izuku felt something stir within him. It was like a warm current flowing through his veins, a power he had never known he possessed. For a brief moment, his eyes seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, a faint pinkish aura shimmering around him. Itsuka gasped, feeling a sudden increase in Izuku's strength. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and for a second, she could have sworn she saw something ancient and powerful looking back at her. It was like looking into the depths of a primordial forest, wild and untamed. The moment passed as quickly as it had come, leaving Izuku feeling dazed and slightly disoriented. He shook his head, blinking rapidly as the strange sensation faded away. The world seemed to snap back into focus, the familiar surroundings of the dojo grounding him once more. Hideo, watching intently, noticed the change. His eyes narrowed slightly, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. But before he could ponder it further, the moment passed, and Izuku was back to his normal self, looking slightly confused but otherwise unchanged. Finally, Hideo called time. Both teens stood panting, their clothes damp with sweat but wide smiles on their faces. The air in the dojo was thick with the scent of exertion and the lingering energy of their bout. "Impressive, both of you," Hideo said, nodding approvingly. His voice carried a hint of pride as he continued, "Izuku, you've got natural talent. Those instincts of yours are quite something. And Itsuka, your form is improving nicely. Your control is getting better every day." Both teens beamed at the praise, their chests swelling with pride. As they cooled down, stretching out tired muscles, Izuku couldn't shake the strange feeling he'd experienced during the spar. It was familiar somehow, like a long-forgotten memory trying to surface. He glanced at his hands, half expecting to see something different, but they looked the same as always, callous from training but otherwise ordinary. Itsuka noticed his contemplative look. "Everything okay, Izuku?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. He looked up, meeting her worried gaze. "Yeah, I'm fine," he assured her, trying to shake off the lingering sense of something. "More. Just thinking about something. It's probably nothing." After their intense sparring session, Izuku and Itsuka hit the showers, the cool water a welcome relief on their overheated skin. As Izuku let the water cascade over him, he couldn't help but replay the sparring match in his mind. The way his body had moved, the surge of power he'd felt, it was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. Over the next couple of weeks, a comfortable routine settled in. Mornings were filled with rigorous training sessions, where Izuku and Itsuka pushed each other to their limits. The dojo became a second home, the smell of sweat and wood polish a comforting constant. Afternoons were spent exploring the neighborhood, sharing stories, and occasionally indulging in ice cream from the local parlor. Izuku found himself opening up more, sharing bits and pieces of his past with Itsuka. She listened without judgment, offering support and understanding in a way he'd never experienced before. Evenings were reserved for family dinners, filled with laughter and warmth that Izuku had never experienced before. The kendo's home was always lively, with conversations flowing freely and jokes being tossed back and forth. Izuku found himself joining in more and more, his initial shyness melting away in the face of their genuine affection. But as much as Izuku loved being with the Kendos, a nagging feeling in his gut told him it was time to move on. He couldn't shake the sense that his journey was far from over. The world seemed to be calling to him, whispering of adventures yet to come and challenges still to face. One sunny morning, as golden light filtered through the kitchen windows, casting warm patterns on the wooden table, Izuku broke the news. "I think it's time for me to go," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes fixed on his half-eaten breakfast. The Kendos fell silent, a mix of sadness and understanding crossing their faces. The clinking of cutlery ceased, replaced by a heavy silence. Hideo was the first to speak, pushing back his chair with a gentle scrape. He stood and walked over to Izuku, clapping him on the back with a firm but gentle hand. "You're always welcome here, son," he said, his eyes conveying more than words ever could. The warmth in his voice made Izuku's throat tighten with emotion. Akane, her apron still dusted with flour from the morning's baking, pulled Izuku into a tight hug. Her motherly warmth enveloped him, smelling of cinnamon and home. "Remember to eat well, okay?" she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. When Izuku wasn't looking, she slipped a small package of homemade cookies into his backpack, a last gesture of care. Itsuka, however, wasn't quite ready to let go. Her brows furrowed as she scribbled on a piece of paper, her handwriting a bit messier than usual. Trembling hands. The pen scratched loudly in the quiet kitchen. "Here," she said, thrusting the paper towards Izuku, her eyes shining with determination and a hint of something more. "Take my number. You better call, or I'll hunt you down myself." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying her attempt at bravado. As Izuku turned to leave, his heart heavy with both gratitude and melancholy, Itsuka surprised him. She quickly leaned in and planted a soft, quick peck on his cheek. The sudden warmth of her lips against his skin sent a jolt through him. Her face immediately turned as red as a ripe tomato, and Izuku wasn't far behind. The sudden gesture left him speechless, his mind reeling, his hand unconsciously touching the spot where her lips had been. "Stay safe," Itsuka mumbled, suddenly finding her feet incredibly interesting. The tips of her ears were burning red, matching her flushed cheeks. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, unable to meet Izuku's gaze. With a final wave and a promise to keep in touch, Izuku set off on his own. The weight of his backpack was nothing compared to the weight in his heart as he left behind the first place he'd truly felt at home. The Kendos stood in the doorway, watching him go, their silhouettes framed by the morning light. For the next few days, Izuku wandered the streets, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts about his next move. The city bustled around him, a constant stream of noise and movement. He'd occasionally stop to help someone in need, an old lady struggling with her groceries, her wrinkled hands trembling as she thanked him. A lost child with tear-stained cheeks finding their way home, their small hand clutching his tightly. These small acts of heroism made him feel like he was on the right path, each grateful smile a balm to his troubled soul. But as night after night passed with him sleeping in parks or abandoned buildings, exhaustion began to take its toll. The hard ground left his body aching, and the constant vigilance required to stay safe left his mind frayed. Dark circles formed under his eyes, and his movements became sluggish. On the third night, Izuku was barely keeping his eyes open. The streetlights blurred into hazy orbs as he stumbled down an empty street, his vision growing fuzzy at the edges. The cool night air did little to clear his head, and his steps became more unsteady with each passing moment. The city had grown quiet, the usual cacophony of urban life replaced by an eerie silence. Suddenly, a shadow moved behind him. Izuku's tired mind registered the danger a second too late. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, but before he could react, a sharp chop to his neck sent a jolt of pain through his body. He felt himself falling, tumbling into a sea of darkness, his last conscious thought a mixture of fear and resignation. As Izuku's consciousness faded, he heard a gruff voice speaking, as if from a great distance. "Yeah, I found him. Bringing him in now." The words echoed strangely in his fading awareness. The mysterious figure scooped up the unconscious boy with surprising gentleness. In the dim streetlight, there was a glint of white hair and white bandages covering the figure's eyes. With a grace that belied his burden, the figure disappeared into the night, melting into the shadows with practiced ease, leaving behind only the whisper of the wind and the faint echo of footsteps on the empty street. Time skip. In a dimly lit corridor, Nizu and the tall, enigmatic figure stood in hushed conversation, their eyes fixed on the window that revealed a somber scene. Inside, Izuku sat slumped in a chair, surrounded by a room adorned with intricate talismans that seemed to pulse with otherworldly energy. The air was thick with tension, the weight of unseen forces pressing down on them. "What?" Nizu's voice was a mix of disbelief and outrage, his usually calm demeanor shattered. "You mean to tell me that after you spoke with those stuck-up elders, they're planning to carry out a secret execution, Gojo?" The Chimera's small paws were clenched into fists, his tail lashing back and forth in agitation. "Yeah," Gojo replied, his voice carrying a weight that belied his casual tone. Satoru Gojo cut an imposing figure, even in the dim light of the corridor. His dark blue zip-up jacket rustled softly as he shifted, the high collar casting shadows across his face. The slim-fit black pants and polished dress boots he wore gave him an air of understated elegance, a stark contrast to the gravity of their conversation. But it was the white bandages covering his eyes that drew the most attention, a physical manifestation of the mystery that surrounded him. "That's ridiculous," Nizu sputtered, his voice rising with each word, echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "He's just 16. The Chimera's fur bristled, a physical representation of his mounting anger and frustration. Gojo's shoulders sagged slightly, a rare show of vulnerability from the usually unflappable sorcerer. He leaned against the wall, his posture betraying a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I know," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of frustration and concern. "But the truly concerning part is, he's okay with it." Nizu's eyes widened in shock, his voice barely above a whisper as he asked, "What do you mean?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Gojo ran a hand through his shock of white hair, his voice low as he explained. "About 2 days before you got here, he tried to use that cursed spirit to escape the room. When that didn't work, he paused, the weight of his next words hanging heavy in the air. He tried to kill himself. If Rika hadn't stopped him, he trailed off, leaving the grim possibility unspoken. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Nizu's sharp intake of breath. The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. After a moment, Gojo straightened, his resolve clear in the set of his shoulders. "I'll go and talk to the kid," Nizu said, his tone brooking no argument. The Chimera nodded, worry etched into every line of his face. With fluid, controlled movements, Gojo approached the door. He paused for a moment, his hand on the handle, taking a deep breath as if steeling himself for what lay ahead. Then, with a determined push, he opened the door and stepped inside. The room was thick with an oppressive energy, the talismans on the walls seeming to writhe in the dim light. Shadows danced in the corners, and the air felt heavy, almost difficult to breathe. In the center sat Izuku, his legs drawn up to his chest, arms crossed tightly as if holding himself. Together, his head was bowed, green curls obscuring his face, his entire posture a picture of defeat. At the sound of the door, Izuku's head snapped up, his gaze locking onto Gojo. The boy's teal eyes were dulled with fatigue, dark circles etched beneath them speaking of relentless exhaustion. There was something else there too, a flickering ember of defiance, buried deep beneath layers of pain and resignation. It was a spark that refused to be extinguished despite everything. Gojo moved forward, each step measured and deliberate. The floorboards creaked softly under his weight, the sound oddly loud in the oppressive silence. He came to a halt before Izuku, his towering presence filling the room. Despite the bandages covering his eyes, his gaze seemed to burn into Izuku's very soul, penetrating and intense. When Gojo spoke, his voice was low and intense, carrying the weight of unspoken truths. Izuku Yagi, he said, the name rolling off his tongue with a sense of significance that made Izuku sit up straighter. We must talk. So, this was the end of part 1 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next